Greetings, everyone. We are live again. Dynasty Amir Search for Huru. Thank you all. Thank you so much for joining. Do me a favor, guys. Hit that like button as you come to the chat room. Again, please hit that like button. Also, make sure you share. Also, please subscribe to the content. Again, please hit that subscription bell. I greatly appreciate it. Tours, got a couple tours coming up. So we are rolling to Nigeria next month. We will be in Nigeria next month, August 8th through the 17th. August 8th through the 17th will be in Nigeria. If you'd like to join us, please visit Danfo, Danfo, Danfo.Africa. Also, we are rolling to Sierra Leone in November. Again, we're rolling to Sierra Leone in November 20th through December 3rd. If you are interested in joining us, please visit again Danfo, Danfo, Danfo.Africa. We will love to have you all. Again, we will love to have you all join us. And then the gear, people are always asking Dynasty, where do you get the gear from? Visit Ileamir, ILEAMIR.com and go there and grab your prints, your shirts, all that good stuff. Shout out to everybody so far in the chat room. Again, please hit that like button. Without further ado, we have Sister Kyle with us today. We're going to be discussing, guys, we're going to keep the discussion going on Liberia. I think is very important. It's something that for some reason, especially when it comes to African American history, it's completely, it's not there for some reason. It's very, very odd. Sierra Leone and other stories of, African Americans who decided that they were going to leave America and resettle somewhere else. We actually spoke on a couple of years ago. The Vaughn family who left America and went back to Nigeria. So I talked about that. So there's all these stories of, African Americans who left to go back to Africa or the Caribbean or Canada, with the American Revolution, the Black loyalists went to Canada, then relocated to Sierra Leone. So, I think this, for some reason, this part of history has been not shared and not told. I don't know why, but for some reason, it's just people don't talk about it, which is weird. I know Kala, our friend Kala, he was saying that I've never been. So have you been to the Smithsonian Museum in DC?
Yes.
He said there's nothing there about Liberia. Is that true or?
I disagree. I think Liberia is not as prominent. And so you do have even exhibits about Benjamin J.K. Anderson and different things, but I think that Liberia, of course, my point of view may be a little biased, but I think Liberia should have a more prominent role, especially considering, the ties to the United States, of course, being established by African Americans, but it's not as prominent as it should be. But there are exhibits about Liberians. Benjamin J.K. Anderson narrative of a journey to Musadu. There's another exhibit. There's actually quite a few now that I think about it. It's just not like a prominent where if you're walking in and you're looking for information on Liberia, it should really be in your face, but it isn't. I think that's probably what he means.
Okay, yeah, I haven't been to the Smithsonian yet, so I haven't been yet. But you brought up a great. In fact, first introduce yourself, let everybody know who you are. Then I'm gonna start off with you made a statement that triggered a question. But first,
so I'm Coup. I'm Liberian. My family immigrated to the United States in the 70s. So I was actually born in the States, and they immigrated here for the purpose, my parents, of going to school and returning to Liberia to help advance their country. And it didn't happen because there was a coup and then a subsequent war. So I'm among those people who I consider to have grown up in exile. because the intention was never for me to remain here. I was just born here because of circumstances. And I did go back to Liberia, or go to Liberia. I consider myself a dual citizen by birth. And so I did go to Liberia in 2008 and remain there until late 2015, early 2016. Relocated back to the States. I spent a number of years in Liberia, first working with UNDP and then later on with the government. So as far as history is concerned, and my purpose for being on the show, I have spent my entire life studying African world history under the tutelage of some of the greatest African minds. And I'm so blessed and so honored to have been nurtured by some great people. Professor Mahmoud Al-Kati at Macalester College, who recently retired, Afro Studies professor there. The late Kwame Ture, as many know him as Kwame Ture, many know him as Stokely Carmichael, was also a mentor of mine, and many, many others. But I want to say that to preference the fact that this is something that I grew up with. And because of the violent way that I lost my father in Liberia, many of these people felt the need to step in and be fathers for me. And they did a wonderful job. I never felt fatherless because a lot of the mentors that I've had. And also they sparked in me a love for history. And that is something that I have used as a tool to kind of make sense of the violence that took my father's life in 1985. So history for me has also been a journey of discovery and healing, because I wanted to understand why a country that my father loved so much would have taken his life, based on the language that he spoke. And this happened when I was very young. And I found the answer. I found the answer through history. And so I think for a lot of us, making sense of trauma and pain when we come from a country like Liberia, even people who are African American or from the Caribbean, history, I think, puts our experiences and our shared trauma in context, in its proper context. Pain is personal, but it's also political, and it also has a basis in history. There's a reason things happen. And, I was, that soul searching I did was through, historical research. So I've actually been a serious student of history since I was I'd say about 11, 12 years old, as funny as that sounds, but that's a fact. Yeah.
If you don't mind me asking, what in 1985, what happened to your father?
So my father is the late great Eugene Kita. He is a Mono man from a county in Liberia called Nimba, and that's never been important. It wasn't important until he was killed. his ethnic group and his language that he was born speaking was not important really until he was killed, because before his death, I was very young when he was killed. I don't remember that being at the forefront of his identity. His identity was always, as an African man, as a Liberian man, not as a Mono man. I mean, it was almost secondary to the fact that he was a proud Liberian. So in 1985, there was a botched attempt to overthrow Samuel Doe. And my father was in Liberia visiting. He wasn't even living there. He was there for a sick family member, trying to help him get his papers to come to the U.S. for treatment. Long story short, he went there on a very quick trip, got caught up at a time when there was this botched coup in Monrovia. He was in Nimba, where we are from, and there was a campaign to just round up everyone who was from the same ethnic group as the person who attempted the coup. And so at which point my father was pointed out by some very, envious people who don't like to see, people who are successful, took the opportunity to say, hey, this guy, came from America, the timing is suspicious, y'all kidding. And they went and I really will spare your audience the gruesome details, but they murdered him in a very
I can only imagine seeing what happened in 1980 to the coup on the beach.
So they killed him in a very disturbing manner. The gist of it is we have no grave, we have no body, we had no. My brother is memorializing my father through a farm on his property in Liberia, and that's beautiful. But we don't have a grave for my father, and it's because of the brutal way in which he was murdered and dismembered. So that was trauma. I was a young child when this occurred. And unfortunately for me, they didn't spare me the gruesome details.
Right.
So they basically, for the most part, they didn't. And so I was basically shocked out of my early childhood, this realization. And as many of you listening to the show know, girls and their dads, there's nothing in this world, the moment a baby is born, a baby girl is born, the person that makes them feel most safe is their father's voice. And I had this type of admiration for my dad, thought he was invincible. And when I found out that he was killed, I didn't even accept that. And it took a long time for me to really understand that he wasn't coming back. But my quest for understanding why this happened to him is what I believe led me down this path to start researching our history and the context that created the events that we experience in the present.
So why? Okay, so you mentioned he was accused of, I guess, allegedly being a part of a botched coup.
They knew he wasn't.
He was not allegedly. He wasn't. He wasn't a part of.
They knew he wasn't part of the coup. Yeah, and when he was killed, President Doe was like, "Oh, that's too bad. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time."
Right. Okay. So why? No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So they just took the opportunity, and they did it even in the subsequent Civil War. They took the opportunity to settle scores with people that they either envied or were angry with, falsely accusing people, looking for opportunities to settle scores. Unfortunately, that's what happened. And so my father was not the only person who was, killed unjustly. And that's something I had to understand. And that's why I don't have, I feel like it's a collective trauma. I don't feel the need to have how people want to have revenge or have this burden of anger. I don't have that. Okay. I don't have that, and I'm very grateful that I don't. I think that's yeah.
And you mentioned it was due to jealousy, which has something to do with tonight's topic, but I want to just kind of go into
it is definitely, Dynast, it is definitely jealousy. You have a society that was extremely socially stratified, and what people don't realize about Liberia is that this lie that there were no indigenous people who were successful, who were educated, who were given opportunities. That lie is perpetuated. In fact, most of the people who were victims of Samuel Doe were educated indigenous people. And so
repeat that again.
Most of the people who were victims of Samuel Doe's regime were educated, so-called native people.
Okay, educated native people. Okay.
So why native people? I think all Liberians are
they were educated native people. Educated
in their terminology.
Okay, so why was there a botched coup, or why was there an attempted coup to remove Doe? Let's kind of start there. I
really came on to talk about the early history and the formation of the country, but these are my informed opinions. Okay,
that's fine.
So these are my informed, and I use the word informed because it's something I have in fact studied. But so I honestly don't even think that the coup was initiated or even planned, maybe not even orchestrated. When I say orchestrated, I understand that this coup was the product of Cold War tactics, war tactics. And the Cold War is called the Cold War because supposedly it wasn't violent. But the Cold War was a hot war in Africa, the Caribbean, and Latin America and Asia. So this fight between the ideologies of communism and capitalism when it comes to countries like Liberia had massive casualties. And the leadership in Africa suffered greatly whenever there was an attempt for African people to assert their free will and their right to self-determination. Talbert was one of those who wanted to assert his free will and his right to self-determination. This is something that played itself out or plays itself out over and over again across the globe. So he had to be, done with. Same thing happened with, Patrice Lumumba in Congo. Same thing happened with Thomas Sankara in Upper Volta / Burkina Faso. This is a repeated thing that occurs. And the tools that are used or the weapons that are used against these people are always the very citizens that they're trying to advance, right? So you have Patrice Lumumba allegedly being killed by his own people who made him eat the pages of his liberation speech, right? Talbert being killed by people who he was working very hard to lift out of this state of poverty, and using a wedge. You see that they see the class stratification. They see the disparity, and so they put a wedge there, exacerbate it, and use a lot of disinformation campaigns and propaganda to blow things out of proportion. And there are so many remnants from that disinformation campaign. You just need to go to YouTube. You can see 60-minute reports, about from the 1970s, making Liberians, late 1970s, making Liberian leadership look like there was some oligarchy, like there were some, closed aristocrats, group that no one else could ever penetrate. And it's a lie. It's a blatant lie. The intermarriage and interaction occurred from the very moment, African Americans landed on the shores, along with repatriated Africans. So
repeat that again. You said the intermarriage was going on when African Americans
immediately.
Okay. So some of the arguments is that, and I knew what some of these arguments were a lie, that they weren't allowed to intermarry. I'm like, that's ridiculous. That's crazy. Go ahead.
And the reason they say that, it's not even a rational argument. They see evidence to the contrary all around themselves. We see evidence to the contrary. But when you repeat a lie, or you exaggerate something, and you do it repeatedly, through disinformation campaigns and all kinds of propaganda, this is what happens. The product of this type of thing is people start to believe things even though the evidence to the contrary is all around them. Let me give you an example. A lie that's often told is that you could not go to school in Liberia, that there was, they even go as far as to say that there was a law that you had to change your name in order to attend school. This is just, for lack of a better word, it's a stupid lie. You've got people going back to the 1800s who had their names. Didwo Twe, Natisie Brunel. These are not people who took on names by force. You've got all of these people, Wolo, who went to Harvard with his very African name, B. Wolo, went to Harvard University in the 1800s. You've got, even today, walking amongst us, they say, oh, you had to go to school. How do you have people like Tiawanse Gonglo, and how do you have all of these people? How did you have my father, Sekita? My name is not an accident, right? My name's Kaw. You think my father never heard the name Mary or Martha before? He named me Kaw because that's his culture. It means first daughter. That's just what it is. Nobody said you had to be this to go to school. It stems from people really going to church, being, you know, baptized into Christianity. And Africans have a long history of voluntarily adopting, you know, the names of conquerors.
Kyle, if I could interject real quick, I'm so sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So
no, don't apologize. I go on and on, so please do.
Okay, so we had a young fellow Liberian on here who was saying his argument was that they were forced to change their names in order to go to school, and he was upset that, you know, about the English names that Americo-Liberians are allegedly forced onto the natives. But himself, he has an English name, and then I asked him, "What did you name your child?" And he gave his child an English name. He said the reason why he did it was because he's a Christian. So you're right. I see this all over Africa. I have my Christian name, I've seen chiefs. They will take on English names because that's the name that was the name that the Europeans gave them. They were trading with the Europeans. You know, for some reason, it's not a problem. But allegedly, Americo-Liberians, I guess, allegedly forcing natives to have English names in order to go to school. It's like it's World War III now. That's what I didn't understand.
It's that whole disinformation campaign. As far as, so this is not to discount individual experiences, but we're talking about a collective story, and everyone doesn't have the same experience. I am not saying that there has never been a person who was told, "I can't pronounce your name. I'm going to call you Bob because I can pronounce Bob." Of course, that has happened, and most often with missionaries.
Right.
But there has never been a law or any official policy of the Liberian government that forces anyone to change their name in order to go to school. That is completely false.
Okay. All right. So you mentioned something earlier in regards to the connection between Liberia and America. All right. In your perspective, your opinion, is Liberia colonized by the United States government? That's the argument. Okay, go ahead.
Absolutely not. So what we're going to do, what I had planned to do, was really talk about why, you know, Liberia was established in 1847 and not 1822. And then we also need to talk about the difference between political sovereignty and economic exploitation.
Okay. I'm gonna write that down. Go ahead.
Yeah. So political sovereignty and economic exploitation. Economic exploitation is not the same as colonization. Okay. And also settlement is not the same as establishing a country. So we're going to go back a little bit. Let's go back a little bit and talk about why Liberia and how Liberia was established. And I think that's important. And the story really doesn't begin with a ship at sea. So there were a couple of things happening simultaneously. The place that was settled, we call Cape Mesurado, which is now Monrovia, the central part of Monrovia, really.
Providence Island, right? Or no?
I would just say Cape Mesurado, which encompasses the Cape, it encompasses Providence Island and some of the immediate swamplands around there. And Providence, it was originally called Perseverance Island, actually. Somebody called it Providence Island and it just stuck. But originally, if you look at the very old text, it's Perseverance Island. But Providence Island is what we call it today. Let me back up a little bit. So when before this area was settled, you had centuries of the people living at this cape interacting with European traders. Centuries. So you had a dynasty almost of kings at Cape Mesurado that called themselves Peter. A lot of Liberians think that repatriated Africans or ACS members named these people English names. oh, they call this man King Peter, they call this man King this. No. There's King Peter's at Cape Mesurado documented going back to the 1600s. There's people with European or even Anglophone or names going back to the 1600s documented. So we do have a history at Cape Mesurado of adopting European names. Even some of the crewmen that were working on ships, merchant ships, slave ships, were taking on Western names. There had been missionaries at the Cape long before 1822. They had, a lot of interactions. So Cape Mesurado was an economic hub, a trading post. So one of the myths is that in 1822, people arrived at Cape Mesurado and there's this bunch of, savages running around that never saw, foreigners. And that's absurd. There is a long, centuries long. In fact, these people were interacting with Europeans before the transatlantic slave trade began. This is important to note. So the people at Cape Mesurado were not ignorant, whatever people call, these savages or whatever running around, not understanding government, not understanding trade. That's not true. The other myth is that there's some homogenous group of people.
I was going to get to that. I was going to get so this is my. I'm going to let you finish, but before I forget my next question. My next question is, because they make it seem when the Americo-Liberians came to Liberia that Liberia was already this monolith. All the different tribes lived together cohesively, and they were just all one.
No,
but go ahead and finish your statement.
So we have different language families, we have different ethnic groups. I don't use the word tribe because it's diminutive and it doesn't tell the correct story. I use the word ethnic groups. These are distinct ethnic languages, linguistic groups, and cultures. So you have people who had already had a heavy influence of Islam. You have descendants of the toppled empires in the north, which historically is referred to as Western Sudan, which is not modern Sudan, but north, meaning Guinea, Mali, Senegal, that whole region that was, the boundaries of ancient Sangay, ancient Mali. So descendants of those people, you've got the coastal people who are what we call Coup or Clau speaking people, which are the modern definition of these languages, or modern terms for these languages are Kru, Bassa, Grable, etc. These people are not some homogenous group. They had wars, they had conflicts between one another. There were invasions coming in from the north. You had the Mani invasion in the 1600s. You had, the Dey fighting with the Gola. You had the Vai in the Pele Wars. You had so many conflicts going on.
Right.
People being, practicing all kinds of injustices against other populations, taking their land, selling each other into slavery. And
right.
These things are not really understood. These dynamics that occurred in history are not really understood by the average person. So the idea that there's some homogenous group of Native people that had a single story or a single experience with the Republic is untrue. So my people in the North and Central Territory remain sovereign, really, politically sovereign and culturally autonomous until very, very recently, until the 20th century. So for the most of the early part of Liberia, our relationship with the Republic was that of trade until the early 20th century. So we would only have our long distance traders really interacting with the Republic, taking ivory, gold, rice, especially. We had the Bading Rice Station, which is one of the largest rice plantations in the Western Hemisphere at that time. So probably in the world. And so the Bading Rice Station, which was in Nimba, you have, people, porters, as some people would refer to as slaves, carrying rice to the coast and trading in pepper, rice, and all kinds of agricultural products, ivory. You had a lot of trade occurring. So the experience that people may have had, like the Dey would have had, would not reflect the experience that a Mano or a Bandi person in the North would have had. So that's the first myth I want to dispel. There's completely different experiences and interactions with the Republic. For
give me a second.
example,
My
okay.
hold on, my guys, do me a favor, hit the like button. Let me see my. Okay, there we go. All right, perfect. All right,
Okay, so
let's see here. Where else? So we have that. So let's, I guess, probably go skip a little bit ahead a little bit. The
okay.
let's deal with the ACS. Let's deal with the ACS. Maybe I don't know if we're getting too far yet.
That's fine. I mean, I'll just
or you know what? If you already have like a timeline or whatever you have bullet points, go ahead and
yeah. So let's talk about repatriation. Let me just go and just repatriation was a response to resistance, not sympathy. So what do I mean by that? How did this whole repatriation movement come about, and why was there a need for people to go back to Africa?
Haitian Revolution.
Yeah. So so it is a response to resistance. It wasn't because people felt sorry for enslaved Africans or freed Blacks, really. It was because the numbers of African people were growing. There were, the Haitian Revolution from 1791 to 1804 was almost like a catalyst for other smaller rebellions in the Caribbean and in North America. So then you had the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade of 1808. Why did that happen? The abolition of the transatlantic slave trade, they didn't end slavery. They just ended the importation of new slaves because the numbers were a threat to the power structure. They didn't want to keep bringing these people in and have the possibility of a full-out revolution and an overthrow of the power structure. So the British, and then later on the Americans and others, supposedly ended the transatlantic slave trade. But it continued. And it continued illegally and illicitly because there was still a demand for new human beings. But the numbers greatly reduced. There was a horrible uproar, not horrible for us, but horrible in the sense of the policymakers at the time. It was called the German Coast Uprising. There was a rebellion which about 300 slaves broke free and decided to, massacre as many people as they could. And what they ended up doing was they set such a fear among white Americans that they felt that they needed to do something about this. These freed Blacks who were no longer in chains were serving as an inspiration to those who were still in chains to make a break or to struggle for freedom. So they said, let's get rid of the freed Blacks from the soil so that they will not serve as an inspiration for those who are in bondage to continue to rebel. That is happening. And at the same time, Africans in America themselves, African Americans themselves that were liberated, were thinking about and planning on going back to Africa, and they were doing so. You had Paul Coffey and others. After the American Revolution, you had the establishment of Sierra Leone, where they brought the former African Americans from Nova Scotia, which they were sent for refuge, sent them to Sierra Leone. So this repatriation movement did not begin with Liberia. I want to make that clear. Sierra Leone is clearly the first, place that people started to repatriate to. So that's what makes Sierra Leone distinct. So the Sierra Leone Company was the precursor to ACS. Okay. The Sierra Leone Company was a private organization, and the British government sanctioned it, but it was a private organization, the same way ACS was modeled in the United States. And the original intent of the American Colonization Society was to repatriate people to Sierra Leone, not Liberia, not to create a different place, but to put them somewhere where they would work with the British to kind of, protect and grow this area. So if you think about it, the original settlement was at Sherbrooke. They were trying to repatriate these people to Sierra Leone. I mean, it continued even after 1822, even with the Amistad Rebellion, when those people were set free on the ship Amistad, they were sent to Sierra Leone. So Sierra Leone was the place for repatriation. It is important to also note that Liberians think that the people that were living on the coast were powerless. These are people who had been trading in guns, ammunition,
right,
all kinds of weaponry. They had been fighting wars. Nobody could just come in and bully this group of people at this point in history. At this point in history. So when they went to Sherbrooke to find land, they gave them something that wasn't, they basically gave them swampland that wasn't conducive. A lot of people died. If you read the journal of Daniel Cooker, the journal of Daniel Cooker, it should be available online at no cost because it's in the public domain. He talks about that first journey on the Elizabeth, what his experiences were.
Okay.
Daniel Cooker was an African American who was on board this ship Elizabeth, which was the first ship the ACS sent back. And one of the things that Daniel Cooker reveals in his journal is that there were Native Africans on that ship. I bring that up because one of the misunderstandings that people have is that everybody on the Elizabeth was a descendant of an enslaved African American. Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter is there were also recaptured Africans on that ship along with African American repatriates. Mm-hmm. So they arrive at Sherbrooke. The ACS Captain Eli Ayers in Stockton realized that the area was not conducive. The agreements that had been made earlier for ACS to have land were reneged on. The people were like, the local people basically decided they're not going to let them live there.
Right.
They're not going to allow them to stay. So another testament to the fact that these Africans were sovereign and could say no is that the fact that they said, no, you can't stay here. You got to go find somewhere else for your people.
Right.
So ACS went down the coast. Eli Ayers and Captain Stockton went down the coast looking for other areas. They stopped at Cape Mount. The people said, no, you're not buying land. You're not bringing a bunch of abolitionists here to come ruin our lives. They went further down near what is now Bassa. It was finally at Cape Mesurado that King Peter, with the help of a mulatto trader that was living on the coast, who decided, okay, yes, we're going to negotiate for you to have what we call now Providence Island. Mm-hmm. So the other thing that people don't realize is that there were people living on the coast who were European, so-called mulatto. I don't like that word, but that was the language of the day. People living at Cape Mesurado. It was an economic hub. There was diversity there. There were people from different backgrounds there already by 1822. So when they acquired this land, they were interacting with other people who could also read and write. And the interesting thing is, the fact that this is confused with Liberian history is strange because it's well documented. It's not like, this is stuff that's hidden. I mean, these things were well documented. Many of these people who arrived at the coast kept journals. People could read and write. Even some of the repatriated Africans were literate. Daniel Cooker was a pastor. He could read and write, even though he never really followed them to Liberia. He documented in great detail their first journey to the continent. So I'll pause there. I'm rambling on. I just want to know if you have any other questions before.
Yeah, guys, hit the like button again. Please hit the like button. All right, here we go. So the word salad, American Colonization Society. Because the term colonialization was in, the name of the group.
Yes, I see what you're saying.
Facilitate, the free slaves and recaptures.
So colony has two meanings, right? Okay. Colony has two meanings. It means a settlement of people. There's also a second term meaning for colonization, which is the political imposition of one state over another state's territory. In the sense of ACS and the Sierra Leone Company, colonization meant a settlement of people. It didn't become the second meaning in Sierra Leone until after the Berlin Conference.
Oh, okay.
So Sierra Leone,
you need to repeat that again. Repeat that. People need to hear that. So that's very important.
This is a big confusion for people. So in the sense of the Sierra Leone Company, This was colony in its terms, a settlement of people. It did not become colonization in the second definition, which is the political imposition of one country over another territory, a foreign territory. That happens after the Berlin Conference. That's very important. So Sierra Leone wasn't colonized when Freetown was settled. So Sierra Leone was not colonized when Freetown was settled. Sierra Leone was colonized after the Berlin Conference. Now you have the British Crown, the government coming in and imposing political control as a country over other people's territory. Now they are taking the sovereignty away from the Africans existing within the territory. Before, they only had, basic interaction with the people at Freetown and its environs. And they were managing that with governors and agents. But when it becomes an actual colony is when the government steps in.
Man, that's like the best definition I've heard, and it makes the most.
So, and that's what it is. That's exactly what it is. And so it's no longer just a settlement where they're managing this kind of reservation of African people, right? They're putting these people in. Basically, it was a reservation. You know how they push like the Native Americans into little reservations but this is something similar, except it's on the continent of Africa. So they're putting these people somewhere and they're helping manage it and keep these guys. It's like a place that you can put them, but it is not an extension of the British government. Whereas after the Berlin Conference and the partitioning of Africa, where they have now divided the continent as far as Europeans are concerned between themselves or among themselves, is when the British government now inserts itself over Sierra Leone. And they were able to do so because Sierra Leone never did what Liberia did.
Right. Okay.
And so this is why I say Liberia 1847, not 1822. What makes Liberia significant and important in the grand scheme of African world history is the audacity of that group of people to assert themselves as an independent country, while their countries of birth were still practicing chattel slavery. They had the audacity to assert their sovereignty at a time when the United States of America was still practicing chattel slavery.
Right.
And one of the reasons they did so was because they no longer wanted to fly the American flag over their territory, this place, when the flag represented a land that had their brothers and sisters in bondage.
Exactly.
So you've got the heroes of Liberia's independence and Liberia's sovereignty are Elijah Johnson and, Hillary Teague, as Liberians pronounce it, Hillary Teague. I mean, these are the heroes of Liberia's independence. And along with many, many indigenous people who were integrated very early on. King Peter, who was one of those who negotiated for the settlers or ACS to acquire land, he was later deposed and his people were attacked by Gatamba, who was a warrior king. And many of his people were killed, and the remnants of his clan sought refuge in Monrovia among the settlement for protection.
Were they allowed to come in?
They were absolutely allowed to come. They were incorporated, and they were, basically assimilated. Now, what did happen is, in order for you to join the settlement, you have to remember context and time period. This is not 2022. This is the late 1820s. This is a time period when they, were extremely superstitious, very, Protestant Christian, and the idea was, you can come, but you've got to give up your crown. You can't be King Peter and live among us. Right. You've got to, your people cannot be practicing all that voodoo, right? Because you've got people paranoid. They're Christians, and they're afraid to death of, the traditional African religion is scary to them, because and even today, even my aunts, if I wear cowrie shells, they're like, "Oh, what are you doing? You look like one of those witchcraft people. Take that jewelry off." So even the indigenous people are terrified of traditional African beliefs even today. So at that time, the African Americans were like, "You can come, but you gotta, you guys have to leave your shrines and all that stuff, and you gotta come and you gotta accept Jesus. You gotta accept Jesus."
And Ms. Khan, what's the biggest detractors are people that are, I guess, say that the American Liberians were colonizers and they forced their ways onto the native people. Like today, they're Christian, and then when you ask them about the native religion, it's like they don't want no part of it.
Because that's what Christianity and Islam do, right? So before these people came, the other religion of conquest was Islam.
Right.
And so you had people, changing their names to Muhammad and Amadou, or Ahmed, or whatever else, and taking on Arabic names to match the religion, because that's what happens. That's what human beings do. When you accept a new religion, a new faith, you take on the name and the persona of the culture that brought it to you. So before people were taking on these English names, you had the Vai and Gola and others that had adopted Islam, and Bandi and others, and they were taking on Muslim names, and they were looking at everyone else to be pagans and demons, and they were not as good as they were.
Okay.
You're not as good as us, because we know God, and you're worshiping, you're worshiping at your shrines. And so this is human nature. I don't see the distinction between what happened with Islam in Africa and what happened with Christianity in Africa. The two religions would literally spread in the same way, through conquest and force. In fact, Islam even more so than Christianity, especially in Liberia. Most of the people who became Christian in Liberia, it was voluntary.
Okay, so let's get to 1842. When 1842 is the year that the Americas declared independence, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So the argument is, to drop the mic, Liberia was colonized because in 1842 is the year that Americas declared its independence from the American Colonization Society. Is that a correct argument or statement that that's proof that Liberia was colonized because Liberia had to declare its independence?
So the American colonization, you declare your independence, you declare your sovereignty. And what they were doing was they were saying, we are no longer American citizens. Because they were American citizens, technically living on African soil in a colony. So remember what I said about a settlement of people on a foreign land? Not the political conquest of a foreign land, but a settlement. So they were Americans essentially settled in a foreign land. And now they're saying, we are establishing our own country. We are going to bring down the American flag. This flag that we are going to create, we're going to create our own flag to represent ourselves. We're going to collect our own taxes. We're going to be a country, a modern state. This was absolutely revolutionary. Something similar had happened in Maryland County, because one of the things that we don't also understand is that there were numerous colonies set up along the coast, and they were, for the most part, independent of one another. And then eventually they ended up coming under this umbrella of colonies called the Commonwealth of Liberia, but it still wasn't sovereign. It was just like a loose association of settlements. When they declared independence, Maryland had already said we're a country. Nobody recognized Maryland, but they were, they had their situation, their colony was pretty awesome, because they were intermingled with the Grebos so much. The Grebos were like, we don't have to listen to these people, we can do our own thing. So the spark too that occurred in Maryland was similar to what happened in Liberia, is that you've got these sovereign Africans who are historically sovereign living in the settlements and not appreciating this white supremacist hierarchy where everything you do, you've got to go report back to massa. Because a lot of the people, especially the descendants of King Peter and others who were living among them, these were descendants of sovereign monarchs. They had a certain arrogance about them too. They adopted the Christianity. They wanted to learn and they wanted to, you know, interact, but they also had this kind of, wait a minute, you know, why can't we do this? And then you had these freemen from the northern states, these African-American freemen, people like, you know, Hillary Teague. They had a lot of these guys went to Liberia because they had sense, because they understood that if they remained in the United States, they were not going to be allowed to reach their full human potential. They were not going to be allowed to do what every human being should have as a birthright, which is to manifest their destiny and assert their own, you know, will over their lives. So it is important to note that this was not a gift. I hear people saying, oh, the people set the people free. No, they did not. No, they did not. Because if that be the case, Sierra Leone would have been a country too. There's an interesting dynamic that occurred in Liberia that did not occur in Sierra Leone. And this is why. So Dinah, think about this. In Sierra Leone, you have a very powerful Sierra Leone, the very powerful Sierra Leone company, which is the British equivalent of the ACS. You also have an extremely powerful British Navy, which is so powerful that it is even helping the Liberian settlements along the coast. The United States in 1822, 1835,
was not a superpower. Was not a superpower.
And right. The United States was fighting its own battles, right? They're gearing up, coming up for, you know, all kinds of conflicts. They're trying to subdue their indigenous population. They're in the midst of one of the, in fact, I would say the greatest genocide in human history, right? So they're asserting their reach in the western parts of their territory, which they didn't have control over. So that's exhausting. They're managing all kinds of things that they didn't have the resources to manage. So they didn't really have the same kind of power. So the ACS is receiving money from both the United States and Britain, because this is a financial thing. Was if you guys resettle people, you get money, especially for the repatriated Africans that are caught on these ships going to the Western world illegally. When they drop them off, they give these people money. It's almost like a foster care program. You know, okay, you take these guys and we'll give you so and so per head, and you guys, you know, baptize them, teach them to speak English, and, you know, the rest is history. So the other thing that Liberians don't realize is the majority of the people that Liberians call Congo are not even Americo-Liberians. They're actually the descendants of recaptured Africans from other parts of West Africa. Or they're the descendants of indigenous Liberians who were baptized and incorporated very early on. So the majority, and in fact, the reason this population was even able to exist and thrive is because of the intermarriage. So you had this, there's no such thing, you know, by the 20th century, very, very few people were fully Americo-Liberian.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so this is why this whole argument about, oh, there was apartheid is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Was there wealth disparity? Was there a lot of cultural disparity? Yes, and we will talk about why. But it absolutely, in the early stages of this republic, the distinction was really about, we are culturally different. And you have to remember, our ancestors, the so-called indigenous people, we didn't have an inferiority complex. We didn't think, my ancestors didn't think that they didn't have a nation. They weren't sitting around waiting for someone to give them a country. I hear people saying, oh, they didn't incorporate all of us. How would they have done that? There's two ways that this happens in history. It's either by will or by force. It's either by free will or by force. And who living in the North Central Territory or any part of the hinterlands of Liberia wanted to give up their way of life that they know and respect to start acting and dressing and conducting themselves like these funny westernized Africans on the coast? Who wanted to do that? I mean, in my lifetime, you know, my great grandmother, you know, was looking down on some of the conduct of my father because he was westernized. So culture is not just because you are looking at people through your modern westernized lens doesn't mean that they thought that there was anything wrong with the way that they were living. These people were controlling their own destiny at that point in history. So I'll pause there. I'm kind of rambling, so I just want to make sure.
No problem. Guys, do me a favor, guys. Hit the like button. Hit the like button. We're going to open up the lines probably like 20 minutes. Got a couple more questions I want to fire off. So you brought up apartheid, because that's the argument that the the American Liberians, they ruled by apartheid. Can we cover that? You know, the local, the indigenous tribe, they weren't allowed to vote. You know, they couldn't move my vote. Can we get into that?
My brother, that is one of the most ridiculous statements and misunderstandings of history that is out here that we need to dispel. First of all, apartheid is a system of laws based on, in fact, it was borrowed from Jim Crow by South Africa. And nothing like that happened in Liberia. In fact, the Liberian Constitution in 1822, the Liberian Constitution in 1822 was more just and progressive than the U.S. Constitution was that same, 1847, than the U.S. Constitution was that same year. Why do I say this? The first thing is they recognized the land sovereignty and the rights of the indigenous people within the territory. The second thing is they recognized the political autonomy of the indigenous people in the territory. You cannot go somewhere and impose your political will on people who outnumber you like 500 to 1. Most of the people who lived in the so-called Liberian territory in 1847, when it was declared independent, were outside of the reach and the realm of the people on the coast. The only reason the Liberian territory pushed so far north to Musadu is because in that period in history, when you settle somewhere and you declare your sovereignty, the source waters of your rivers, it would be the northern or the outmost reaches of your territory. It's not because you've been there and you posted a flag there, but it's because your rivers had to be within your territory. Otherwise, if someone else controlled it, technically they could just build a dam and cut you off. So when you see the source waters of the St. Paul River, the St. John River going all the way into what is now Guinea, at that time, that was the northern stretch of the Liberian territory. It didn't mean that the people on the coast had even been there. It wasn't until 1868 when Benjamin Anderson even went to Musadu that he saw how far the St. Paul River went. So they had this concept of this is the northern territory. It wasn't because they had control, political or economic control over the area. It was simply because that was where the source waters of the rivers were. So there was no, conquest of these areas. The land that my brother is building that farm on today, that land has been in our family since antiquity. So this whole idea that people came and took land it's only true for a very small fraction of people. The majority of the ethnic groups in Liberia still have complete control over their land. It's called tribal land, and everyone knows this because the government can't even do anything in the interior without getting a tribal certificate to this day, because they didn't take the land. It exists within the Liberian territory. It still belongs to those clans. It still belongs to those people. That's not what apartheid did. Apartheid took people off the land and put them on reservations. what they call, places like Johannesburg. Soweto. They took these people from lucrative farmland and put them in these ghettos, in these townships, barren, dry townships where they couldn't even grow vegetables. How can you call that apartheid? There is not a single school that has ever been built in Liberia that has banned indigenous people from attending. Most of the schools that were built in Liberia were spread out throughout the territory. The day mission up the St. Paul River, most of the students that attended that school were Pella, Loma, indigenous children. Ganta Methodist that was built in my home, more than 98% of the students were indigenous children. You've got Cuttington University in Bonn. Even in Monrovia, CWA, Monrovia College, all of these schools, there has never been a time when indigenous people did not attend those schools. The issue is, how did people get to attend the schools? Was it because the Liberian government has so much power they could just go in and grab the chief in a village and say, hey, all the children must go to school or we'll jail you? No, it had to be voluntary. And if you have your culture and your tradition and your spiritual beliefs and you respect yourself, you are not going to just willy-nilly go and adopt a foreign culture and religion. This is a process that takes time. Do you know how Native Americans in this country, in Georgia here and all over the United States were incorporated? They weren't. They were exterminated. And those who were survivors were taken to re-education schools.
I think you're getting a call maybe because you kind of went out.
Did I? Oh, okay. Let me see if I can. 1 second. Is that a little bit better?
No, you're still, the volume still went low. I don't know if you got a phone call or a text or something on.
I probably got a call. I tried to block it. Do you want me to go out and come back in?
Yeah, go out and come back in. Okay. Sorry about that. Hit the like button again. Please hit the like button. We are going to open up the lines here in about 20 minutes, and you guys will call in and ask your question. Let's be respectful. Let's be respectful. Let's be respectful. Leo, you're more than welcome to call in and yell and shout and scream and ask a question. If you disagree with it, you're more than welcome to do that. So guys, I'll put the link in the chat room here shortly, and you are more than welcome to call in. All right, here we go. I'll go ahead.
Okay. Is that a little bit better?
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. Go ahead. Perfect.
Good. All right. So yeah, I mean, did anyone have any questions while I was gone?
No, what I'll do, I'll go ahead and put the link in the chat room and people could call in.
Okay.
Guys, be respectful. Don't be emotional. I don't want a bunch of emotional men on here. Okay, I don't want a bunch of emotional yelling men.
I can handle it. Trust me.
Okay, so guys, links in the chat room. Again, links in the chat room. Go ahead and call in, and we'll go from there. So
yeah.
The 1980 coup.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think was the cause of it? Was it jealousy? Was it CIA? Was it a mixture? Like, what was really the cause of it? Was it the argument is, well, the Americans didn't give the indigenous population power, or there was no indigenous presidents? Like, what do you think for 150 years? What do you think the cause of it was?
So the causal factors is always multiple factors in an equation. It's never a single story. There is much truth to class disparity and wealth disparity. There is much truth to cultural supremacy. African people subscribe, I should say, to the same ideology that oppresses us. So a lot of times when we become westernized, our proximity to Western culture, our proximity to even, if you're Muslim, your proximity to Arab culture sometimes gives African people a sense of supremacy over their fellow African people. This is normal, and it occurs even today. So even the native person that goes to school comes back to his village and he thinks he's better than the other people. So there is absolute truth to that, and it's human nature. Because people always want to identify or distinguish themselves from the oppressed class. So absolutely, that occurred. However, what happened in Liberia was not even a fraction of the disparity and the oppression that occurred in Sierra Leone or Ivory Coast or Guinea or any of the other African countries that were actually colonized. And that leads me to believe and understand that the slight issues that we had in Liberia that could have been easily resolved through activism and advancement, as it's been done in many other parts of the world, was handled in such a brutal and vile manner because of the involvement of those who were upset that these little uppity Negroes that broke away from their control had the nerve to start to negotiate with other people, other powers, to manifest their own destiny and control their resources for the benefit of themselves and not the Western world. This was Talbert's problem, is that he dared to have the courage to speak like a man, think like a man, and act like a man. William Talbert condemned the United States of America for trading with Rhodesia after the League of Nations, which is the precursor to the United Nations, had put sanctions against Rhodesia for its treatment of African people. Talbert came to the United States of America, stood on US soil, and lectured the United States about its moral degradation, its moral ineptitude. This was during a time when places like Cumming, Georgia weren't allowing Black people to live there. Here's this African man standing up and telling the United States, you are wrong for trading with Rhodesia. This is a man who stood up and said, you know what, I'm going to take my country from mats to mattresses. We are going to control our economy. We are going to make sure the resources that are in the ground that have been preserved for all these generations since we declared our independence are going to be put to use for the benefit of our people. Talbert, if you listen to what he was saying and all of the things that he was doing, it is akin to what you would hear from Patrice Lumumba, from Thomas Sankara, from all of the people who were murdered similarly. So was there disparity? Yes, but that is not really what the issue was. I mean, you know, the same reason Black Wall Street was toppled. You can't have that, right? The same reason. You're not allowed to be a full-fledged human being if you're African.
All right, so last question before we bring on the first caller.
Okay.
The 1980 coup, was the majority of the indigenous population in support of the coup, from your perspective?
I know that my family was not. And I also know that there's no such thing as a homogenous indigenous population. I know that many people.
I need you to repeat that part again.
I know there's no such thing as a homogenous indigenous population. I do know that a lot of people have been brainwashed through this intentional disinformation campaign. You had Voice of America blasting things all the time. You had them infiltrating the student movements on university campuses and telling people, you know, planting thoughts in people's heads. I mean, this stuff sounds like crazy spy movies, but it actually happened. And these people documented it. Just like they recently admitted to killing Patrice Lumumba. Just like they recently admitted, you know, their involvement in the death of everyone. So they document this stuff and they justify it because of these were Cold War tactics. So we were used, we were weaponized against ourselves. You know, they talk about injustice in Liberia. Where are the bodies on the beach in South Africa, Rhodesia, Namibia? You know, where are the bodies of the settlers in the countries where they actually committed genocide against indigenous people?
Nowhere. Nowhere.
But the bodies are on the beach in Liberia, and we don't think about that. We have the audacity to try to justify this. It doesn't make any sense.
So, Carl, let me ask you this. Okay, go ahead. So, if say Liberia was colonized by, we'll say, the British, do you think those people would have did the same thing to white people to put them out? Yeah, right.
No, and the reason is, you know, that is part of the brainwashing. You know, you can more easily turn a gun against yourself when you've been conditioned this way. You know, we've been conditioned this way. So, you know, you hear anybody, the way, one of my dear sisters that's in Australia, a Liberian girl in Australia, she says it all the time. She says, we forgive Europeans for genocide, for all kinds of things. But we won't forgive our own brother for a goat that was stolen 6 generations ago. We'll carry that generational grudge. Oh, my great-great-grandfather's goat was stolen by your great-great-grandfather. So, you know, now we must fight. I mean, it's just absurd. The internalized, self-directed anger and hatred, the misguided, you know, not knowing exactly who's standing on your neck. You look up, you see your reflection in the mirror, and you attack it. That's what Africans are doing.
All right, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, finish.
And that's why Africans are so easily weaponized against themselves, because, you know, it's easy to do. It's easy to do when people don't have a sense of context of history. It's easy to turn you into a weapon against yourself.
All right, go ahead, BD. Unmute yourself.
I love you, Prince. BD. How are you?
Go ahead. Alafia ni.
Alafia ni moa. Eshe. How are you, Mama Ka?
I'm well, thank you so much. How are you?
Fine, thank you. You're looking fabulous today.
Thank you.
I greet Prince. I greet you. I greet all the people on the call. I greet everybody in the chat. Everybody at home. Woking Bok Boying. My question to you, Ka, I'm actually busy, so I'm just going to ask the question and I'm going to hop off the call, but I'll still be listening for your answer. Please, can you tell me, with all due respect, if possible, and to the appropriate limit, can you please tell me what was the role and response of the societies, the native societies, during the coup and even to the time of the so-called colonization?
This is a powerful question.
Okay, I'm going to hop off now.
Okay.
But I'm still going to be listening, though.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow. So Dr. Jacine Carr is a Liberian historian. He did his doctoral thesis on our indigenous spiritual society called the Poro. Now, I am not a member of any of our traditional organizations. My late father was, and I do know that as far as that's concerned, I'm not going to speak on specifics. But what I will say is our indigenous power structures, especially in the North and Central Territory of Liberia, which is Nimba, Lofa, Bong, Bopuru, and essentially Western Liberia, which is Cape Mount, they have a cultural continuity and a sense of governance that goes back before Liberia. Those systems had to be dismantled in order for the state to survive. So we don't have a thing called paramount chief in the Liberian traditional context. That was created actually by the British and adopted by the Liberian government in order to be able to control the people in the hinterlands. And this didn't happen until the 20th century. So it happened in the 1900s, mid-1900s. Beginning around the 1920s. So they had to first, in the language of our people, mow down the big trees, the true sovereigns of the area, and replace them with the government-appointed paramount chiefs. This was this was, I'm not going to use the word mistake. It wasn't a mistake. It caused some problems down the road, because now there is no real indigenous structure in place to control outcomes. So once you dismantle the traditional power structure, you have what's left is almost like a remnant or a shell of what was before. What we see today is not what existed in the 1800s. The type of control that our indigenous leaders had over the population no longer existed. That control then begins to shift to the central government. This becomes problematic because now you can have a soldier like Samuel Doe make decisions without consulting the people that he should have consulted. Because now this young person with a gun in his 20s becomes more powerful than the wise ones. Before this happened, when those big trees spoke, no one spoke after them. But when that is now dismantled, you have a very weak control system, and anyone can come in and manipulate the people. I hope that answers your question.
And I have one more. I have a question I'm gonna bring Skylar on. So I was in Liberia in 2019. So I was thinking that the objective of the coup was for, I guess, the indigenous population to take back control and take back control of their destiny, from my understanding. My father used to always go to Liberia as well in the 70s and 80s. My father and my sister, they used to always go. But when I was in Monrovia, I noticed that the Lebanese, even more than Liberia or anywhere I've been to in West Africa, the Lebanese could completely control central downtown Monrovia.
Yeah. And they complain about our Fulani brothers coming from Sierra Leone or Guinea and trying to get into the economy, but you don't really hear the complaints about, people from Lebanon or Syria or India or China. You don't hear it. So yeah, like I said earlier, I think that it's a bunch of hogwash. I don't think that this was something that was orchestrated by no Zos sat in the bush in the sacred forest of Liberia and planned to overthrow the central government. The Zos in the sacred forest of Liberia have always had the ability to do so and chose not to. In fact, this might be for another show, but my forefathers, the reason you see Nimba and Lofa pushing up into Guinea is not because someone said, okay, Liberia, you can have these areas. It's because my forefathers, these warriors in the interior, fought for those areas to remain in Liberian territory. And that's something a lot more Liberians need to be aware of, that we are Liberian by choice, because the options we had was to either be conquered by the French or to remain in Liberia. And many of our forefathers chose to remain in Liberia. When Samori Touré's Woso Empire fell and the French wanted to conquer it, Nimba should have been part of what became Guinea. Lofa should have been part of what became Guinea, and we did not allow it. We didn't allow it. So we have to really understand that context. So I don't agree that indigenous people felt they were taking back their country. I think that is an exaggerated lie. It was a coup, a handful of people who were manipulated to destroy their country in order to save, Africa from the Soviets and from the communists. I mean, it's really what it just boils down to. They were used. And many of those who are surviving, of those people who were used, who are still alive, they know they were used. They know they were used, and those demons haunt them and they cannot sleep at night. Now that they saw what happened in the aftermath, and they didn't receive what they were promised by the agents that encouraged them to do the nonsense that they did, they're dying slowly one by one, and they know they were used against their own country.
Skylar Williams, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, hello, Prince. Yeah, you hear me? Everything good?
We hear you.
Everything's good?
Clear. Go
you
ahead.
Guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay,
Go ahead,
yeah. So
Skylar.
hello, yeah. Like you said, Kaya, like it was the Soviet Union. Like Tolbert was more aligned with USSR, pretty much. He wanted to talk to Gaddafi and all that, and then the coup happened, and Samuel Doe worked more with Ronald Reagan, pretty much. So he was aligned with Ronald Reagan foreign policy, and there's a picture of him with Ronald Reagan. So yeah, like you're right about the whole Cold War situation. And another question to you, Kaya. Do you think many Liberians understand if the Americas or Americans then came to Liberia and set up as a state, then they would have been colonized like the British, like Nigeria and the rest of them, and they would have more or lesser rights than they did under Liberia? I don't think people like Great African or Elvis understand that they would have their ancestors would have less right under the British as opposed to the American Liberian. And my last and final question: what do you think of the movement by the Lebanese to get rid of the Negro clause in the Constitution? Because I heard George Weah said something that the Negro clause that only black people can own property is racist, or some Lebanese like you said, Voice of America, some article said that the Negro clause is racist, and that Negro clause is like it shows like the difference between how African Americans think and Africans think, because that was created by African Americans, the Negro clause, and no other country has that clause. Even with Ethiopia, the other black nation that wasn't colonized, they have no such clause. There's no clause in their constitution saying that only Negro people can own property. So I just want what your thoughts on that, pretty much. Thank you for your time.
Yeah. So full disclosure, Great African is my big brother. So yeah, I don't think that he thinks that I know that he knows that we fought to remain in Liberia. I know that he knows that. I talk to my brother regularly, and he's well learned. Probably was misunderstood in the context of what he was saying. Um, I don't think the average Liberian gives that much thought. One of the problems with keeping people confused, miseducated, and in poverty is that they don't have an opportunity to think about much else but where the next meal is going to come from. And so that's part of the challenge. To address your question about, or your statement about, Samuel Doe, if the objective, which it is, not if, since the objective is to exploit African people and the resources, and that objective has not changed since, the slave trade, it just shifted. It benefits the beneficiaries of the chaos to keep people who aren't very smart or educated in power. It benefits them to keep buffoons in power. So, it's easier to use a person like Samuel Doe. It doesn't take much to make him happy. Hey, you're the president, wear some nice clothes, walk around, you can come to these events. Meanwhile, we're looting your country behind you. So, and you're not out here talking about self-determination or any of this kind of stuff. So yes, the other aspect of his question was about Lebanese having a movement to rid Liberia of the Negro cause. There cannot be a movement of people who do not have, who are guests in your home, to change your home. They are guests in Liberia. And let me tell you this. Listen, there's no legal way for them to do this, is my point. They're guests. Okay. What they can do, they're guests. Lebanese people are guests in Liberia. This is a legal fact. They are residents, they're not citizens. So in order for Lebanese people to make any strides towards changing anything in the Constitution, they have to convince the citizens of Liberia to do so. In order to convince the citizens of Liberia to do so, they have to appeal to them, because the only way it can happen is through a referendum. And every referendum that has been brought about with foreign land ownership or non-Negro citizenship has failed at the ballot box. I find it really interesting that Liberians don't know how to vote for representatives, probably don't choose presidents for the right reasons. But when it comes to this referendum, there's some innate thing that's born into every Liberian voter that says, we can't give up our land rights to people. So they always knock these things down at referendum. So when I say Lebanese are guests, they can't vote, they have to go through the citizens in order to make this change, it is what it is. Without all his questions, I might have missed one or two. He had like
no, those are his questions. Those are questions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, go ahead, Elvis.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dinas, and thank you to Miss Call. I know her from another platform. I have a lot of respect for her. She's well informed in the history of our country. I just want to say, when it comes, Dinas, you always bring up this question about the Lebanese. You know, during the 50s, when Tubman had the open door policy, where he was pretty much welcoming, you know, foreign direct investments from other, countries. This was when a lot of different ethnicities started coming in. You had the Lebanese, the Indians, people from other African countries came in to do business in Liberia. So when you talk about this Lebanese problem, it's not just that it happened after the coup took place. People was coming in during the time of during the 50s and the 60s and establishing businesses in Liberia. So I just want you to understand that. And then secondly, to the point about
Elvis, I can interject and ask a question, and Ms. Carr, you could answer. So before the coup in 1980, did the Lebanese dominate the economy, would you say, in Monrovia, central Monrovia, like I saw when I was there in 2019?
No.
Certainly they didn't dominate the economy at that time, no, but they were a presence at that time as well before.
Okay. Oh yeah, but did they dominate it? Like, because when I was in Monrovia, when I went to downtown Central Freetown, everything was controlled by Lebanese. Like
Right,
the
and
only thing I saw,
whose fault is that, Diners? Are you saying it's the natives' fault? Whose fault? Who are you placing the blame on for that?
Elvis, the only thing I'm gonna pass to Ms. Conker, she's our guest. The only thing when I entered downtown Central Monrovia, all right, I looked at that the Ducor Hotel and the condition it was. I was just sad because my dad used to stay there. He used to tell me all about it. That in Hotel Africa, I saw it depleted, and I saw the Lebanese dominating everything. Liberians working for the Lebanese, and then the Liberians selling SIM cards and just little gadgets on the streets. That just broke my heart.
Yeah.
But go ahead, Elvis.
Right, and I get what you're saying. The point that I'm trying to make is that you had a lot of. I'll get back to that point, but let me just go to the second point that Ms. Carr made. And I think she's a part of the Liberian community. I think I didn't know this about her before today. I didn't know she was born in the United States. So perhaps her perspective on certain things would be different than mine. Because before I even came on the show, I made sure I called my mother and asked her a couple of questions about her father and her mother. And when you're talking about the name, she just told me today her father's name was Gavoyi Bowenzion. That was his native name. Something I never knew until today when I asked her about it.
Wow.
So she told me his family. He was raised by the Bernards in Buchanan. You have some of his descendant Archibald Bernard. That's the family that raised him. And I asked her. I said, why did he change his name? She said, well, they couldn't pronounce his name, so they gave him Joseph Bernard. That was his name that he went by for the rest of his life. And then she told me about my grandmother, whose name we call her Nikki, but her actual name was Nike. Nike, I forgot the last name she told me not too long ago, but she had a native name too. But they changed her name from Nike, which I think it means firstborn in Bassa, to Martha. Martha, that was the name she went by with the other American Liberian family that she was raised by. And later on, when she got married to my grandfather, she changed her name back to Nike, but people call her Nikki. So I just want to tell you that I speak on these things from personal experiences. I'm not going to say I speak for all Native people, but I come on this platform and I talk about my experience and my family's experience. So when I come here and say these things, I'm not telling you a lie, Dynasty, to make it seem like, I'm making stuff up out of thin air. I'm telling you from things that I know personally, secondhand experience, and so forth. And then to get to the coup issue, certainly, Miss Cole, you were agreed. During the time when the coup took place, be it right or wrong, there was the Monrovia was so-called quote unquote hot. The entire city was jubilating for the coup, and it was the majority of the population, even people doing in the villages and in the interior was jubilating for the coup. Now, whether you can say they was jealous that the American Liberian was in power and now they're taking out of power, that's one way to look at it. But certainly those people felt like it was a good thing in their mind. So I think we can't negate the fact that these people did jubilate the fact that the coup happened. And then you always talk about this beach killing, when those people was killed on the pole. And that's a sad thing. I told you all the time, I don't agree with the way they was killed. I don't even agree with the fact that Tolbert was killed. He was the most progressive of all the presidents before him. I will give you that.
Wow,
But
that's an incredible statement. But okay,
right,
have you studied
but
all the presidents before Tolbert?
well, in the modern time, right? He was
In your
giving people,
lifetime?
right,
How many presidents in your lifetime? Okay.
you're right, people that I know. What I'm trying to say is that it was a tragedy what happened on the beach. But equally as so, in Grand Crew County, in Sasstown, there was chiefs who was executed in
What were
that
their names?
in that city. I don't know their names specifically, right?
Hmm.
And like I said, I'm not coming here to have a argument with you in terms of the history, because certainly you know a lot more about the history of Liberia than I do. But I want to
Hmm.
give another point of view to people who may have been, learning about Liberian history and not heard about this other perspective that I'm bringing on this platform. And again, like I say, I respect you, Miss Cole. I follow you on Focus on Liberia. I always call in and I want to
Yeah.
learn more and all of that. So I'm not here to tell you that I know more about Liberian history than you, but I'm giving you the practical experiences that my ancestors or my family had and what they passed down to me. It may not be the same for your family and what they passed down to you, but I'm only speaking from my point of view. So
Yeah.
this happened, and I'm sure you know this. It's not a myth. When I said this on this platform before, Dynasty and them thought I was lying, that it never happened. But you can attest to this. Perhaps you know more details on this than I do. So I would just stop and I can let you, respond to some of those points that I
No,
made.
no, no. What did I say you're lying about, Elvis?
When I told you, Carla was on the show that day. When I told you that they killed these chiefs in the southeast, you said that wasn't true.
No, 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 no. Well, who would? Okay, so number one, who did they kill? Ms. Khan asked a great question. Who did they kill, Elvis?
They were doing the crew wars, right? In Sasstown, when these people was fighting the American Liberians, and when they surrendered themselves, right? After surrendering themselves, they killed them. They killed them,
Okay.
right? So the
What's
people of Grand Crew remember that. People from the southeast, they remember that. So when those people was killed on the beach, some people felt like that was retribution for what happened in Grand Crew during that time. So we can't equivocate the American Liberian death to mean more, than the chiefs who was killed in the villages or in the village. We can't do that. No one The American Liberians who were killed were not more important than those chiefs who died. They weren't. So that's my perspective. I'll let you guys take
okay?
the mic.
So, so I will say this. As far as your grandfather's name, I find it interesting that you're just hearing his name yesterday. Um, that's like wild to me because uh, you know, and I talk about there's no single story of Native people. There's no way in my family that someone would have had an adopted name and we don't know their name, what their name was before until I ask. I mean, that's shocking to me that your mother knows her father's name and never said it to you until you asked, and you just knew him by his English name. That means that that was what they wanted to call him, and that's what they accepted. And maybe didn't see it as oppression, because if you see something as oppression and you're no longer in a position to be oppressed, the first thing I would assume that we would do is break those chains, right? And say, you know what, we're going to take, because even when you become a citizen, you can change your name as
I
part of
asked
your
her
citizenship
quick before.
process.
Let me just say this. I don't want to cut you up, but I
Hey,
asked her
hold on,
that.
hold on, 1 second. I got to interject. So,
I asked her why
Miss
they didn't
Carr,
change their name back.
hold on, hold
I
on,
asked her that question
Elvis,
too.
hold on,
I just
Elvis,
want.
hold on, Miss Carr. I asked Elvis the
Mhm.
same question. I said, because he was, at the Americos forced the indigenous people to change their name. I said, how did you get the name Elvis? Did the American Liberians force you to name yourself Elvis? and that was the name given. Then I asked about his son, and so I'm just like, I'm just trying, like you said, break the chains. Like,
I mean, I don't
I
know.
don't get that part.
Yeah, my father, you know, I'm not going to say the great African's name on here. That's my brother, but he has a very African name. I have a very traditional name. My children, I mean, I was born in the United States. My children are born in the United States. I named my children in my tradition because I know what it is. You've got African people in this world that don't even know their ancestry. And they're looking for African names to put on themselves and their children. And here you have relatives who speak your language and know your history, and your name is Elvis, and we want to blame Americo-Liberians for changing names. That is just something that was a preference in the most part. Because you know, I don't know your grandfather's story. I don't have relatives that had to go live with people. So I'm not gonna, you know, because I'm from Nimba, that wasn't something that happened there, really. You know, it was rare. More common on the coast. But I just can't imagine if they thought that that was oppression, that they would keep it and continue to pass that name down when they know who they were. The other thing I want to mention is the concept of having a last name is really not, it's not really our culture on the Grain Coast. The ethnic groups on the Grain Coast, with the exception of those that adopted Islam earlier, don't really pass names to children the same way that English people do, Western people do. So people usually have their own names, but that's a different conversation for another day. And that might be why we're more willing to adopt other names. But I just, you know, you've got, you know, B. Wolo, plenty of B. Wolo who went to Harvard, who didn't change his name. You know, he was born, that's what they named him, and he kept his hard to pronounce Crew name that I can't even pronounce. So there's too many examples of indigenous people, even on the coast, Crew, and the ethnic group we call Crew or Plow. These people kept their names. Didvotwe, all these people kept their names. They were not forced to change their names because they went to school or lived with people. So you know, I'm not dismissing the personal experience of some people who might have been adopted, but typically when you're adopted, you take your adopted family's name. I mean, that's typically what happens. I have a very good friend who was born in Korea, was adopted by a white American or European American family in Minnesota, and she took on their name, right? So she has this very Scandinavian name. Her name's Astrid, her first name, you know, and she's Korean. So this is normal when you adopt children that they take on your name. That's just normal. But to say that they were going around imposing Western names on random people is just absurd. If you're living with someone, they've adopted you, they brought you in their family as their child, and they give you their name, that's an honor. That's not a burden. And we did it among ourselves as indigenous people too. You adopt, you know, somebody adopt a Pella child and you're Loma, that child automatically becomes Pella. That's not oppression. That's normal. That's the process of adoption. You know, I'm sure nobody went and dragged people's children into their homes by force. We don't have that happening. This was always a voluntary thing. Please take my child and send them to school. The other thing is, what was the other part of his question besides the name thing? It just threw me off. I'm sorry, I went off on a rant.
Go ahead, Elvis.
What was the second part, Elvis?
Right. I mentioned, I guess there's two other parts to it.
Oh, the people jubilating in the street. The people jubilating in the street. That's what we do. That's our culture, right? Many of the people that were jubilating in the street were young people. They didn't even know what was going on. And also there's that coupled with the disinformation campaign. Some people thought that now all of them were going to be rich. All of them were going to be this. And they didn't understand the implications. So you had a lot of very misguided young people. But the people who understood what happened.
I think you're minimizing it right there, Ms.
I'm not minimizing it. I'm speaking from my perspective, and from also the fact that, you know, me being born in the United States has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that I was born of Native parents who were educated and understood things at a very deep level. So both of my parents were very educated. I mean, my mother's still very educated. My mother, you know, she's working on her dissertation right now for a PhD, but my mother's educated. My late father was educated. So I'm speaking from the perspective of a daughter of informed Liberians. not people who were picking up gossip in the streets or were misguided. I'm speaking from the perspective of a person who was born of informed native people. They were not happy with the coup. They knew that it was going to be disastrous. I don't come from a rich, elitist family. I come from an average Liberian family. My family was informed because they were educated. My family was educated because there was a school built on top of my great-grandfather's land, which has gone to Methodist. My family is educated because the Liberian government worked with the United Methodist Mission to build schools in places that they did not have the resources to build schools. And my father went on to become, you know, very useful, a very useful and productive Liberian citizen. And many, many people did. So this idea that, you know, that it was the simple, simplistic, two-dimensional story of apartheid is not, it's just not reality, Elvis. You know, I like to tell people a lot of times, two things can be true and there's multiple factors in every equation. However, in this particular case, the evidence that contradicts the story of apartheid is so overwhelming that it's just the belief that we have in it has been so embedded in our minds that even though there's evidence to the contrary all around us, we contradict this. We've had so many representatives and senators under many administrations that were indigenous. And a lot of Liberians think that that didn't happen until after 1980. Have you ever taken the time to look at who the representatives and senators were, you know, in Grand Bath and all these places from the inception of the country to present? Have you ever taken the time to look and see where these people were born? Have you ever looked to see, you know, what their ethnic backgrounds were? If you do that, you'd be shocked to find out that the country's always been in the hands of indigenous people. We've had an indigenous person as vice president of Liberia, Dosen. And Liberians don't know this because they keep believing this simple narrative and they don't even study their own history to even know if it's true. And then they say things like, oh, it was only, you know, these people could run for president. Dido Twa ran for president. You've had Grebo people who ran against, you know, ran for president. You've had people, Dido Twa was a representative. Did you know that, Elvis? Did you know how many representatives we've had in Monserrato that were of the Clau, or what we call Coup ethnic group, at the turn of the century in the 1800s? That were judges, magistrates in positions of power and authority, not only in the military, but what do you think happened to all these indigenous people as they were educated? They took positions of power. We don't talk about that. We only want to say this simple narrative. It's first of all, it's not the full picture, and it's not the full truth. So until someone can tell me how else this should have happened. I mean, I know that my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, excuse me, my father's great-grandfather wanted nothing to do with these westernized, uppity, funny dressing, funny talking Africans who came on the coast. He wanted nothing to do with these people. And if you talk to many of the descendants of the Madingo, the Bandi, the Lama, they only wanted to trade with these people. They didn't want them coming and bringing their funny ways up into the interior. So there was even a blockade put out to stop these people from penetrating any further. We weren't weak, pitiful people waiting for someone to come give us a country. You know, that narrative in itself is just so racist. It's just so racist. You know, that this concept that, you know, our ancestors were childlike, you know, simpletons running around waiting for someone to come teach them how to live. They respected themselves. They respected themselves. And some of them were tyrants. They weren't, there's no such thing as a noble savage. Some of these people were tyrants. Did he go off? Sorry, Elvis. I hope I answered your question.
No, he'll come back. You know, I have a cool question, Carl. So when it comes to, when Black Americans, whenever we speak on slavery and how Africans sold other Africans to slavery to white people, you weren't slaves. It was indigenous. It was indentured servitude. It was serfdom. We don't understand the concept of slavery didn't exist. It's a European concept. You have all these answers, but I'm almost on my question then. But when it comes to Liberia, oh, these Black Americans, evil empire, they came, white man's attitude, apartheid. Like why is that? Like when we discuss how did the Americans get to America, it's excuses, it's dancing around the question. But once they got to Liberia,
it's more recent. It's more recent. And then also in our lifetimes, there's just been so much emphasis through that whole Cold War disinformation campaign. And then also people experience personal prejudice, right? So there's this element of personal discrimination. So you get bullied. You go to CWA, which is, was a prominent high school, before the war, and your name is Lakwa Willow Flomo. I'm just making this up. So your name's Lakwa Willow Flomo. You go to College of West Africa, and your background is very modest in the Western sense. Your father might be a chief, a very powerful guy where you come from in Bone County, but when you get to CWA, you realize that people are looking down on you because your English is not as good as theirs. You're pronouncing words a little differently. You may not dress as well as they do, right? Because you might, your shoes might not be, the latest trend or whatever. And so you get bullied. And the pretty girls don't want you because your name is Lakwa Willow Flomo. And so you're on this campus. When you go back to your town in Bone County, you're big stuff. But when you get to CWA, you get clowned. You get clowned. You get clowned by the guy named Bernard. You get clowned by the guy named Dennis. You get clowned by these dapper guys who are descendants or their fathers, were have money and wealth and status, and the girls don't want you. The girls don't want you because your name's Lakwa and you come from a village and your ankles are dusty or whatever the case might be. So you get bullied. I mean, it is a fact. That's what happened, right? I have uncles and family members who went to CWA and got clowned. They went from being the big stuff where they came from to going to Monrovia and getting clowned, right? And so now they're angry because they're getting bullied. And so you now, oh, these people are discriminating. Are they discriminating or are you getting bullied? Is there a difference between apartheid and being bullied? You're in the school, you're sitting in the classroom with these kids. You're learning the same things as these kids. Nobody stopped you from going to the school. And a lot of times you're in that school on a free scholarship. And you're sitting amongst these kids and they're making fun of the way you talk. They're making fun of the way you dress. They're making fun of the way you look. That's not apartheid. That's you getting bullied. And then you take this and you go back and you say, you know what? Then you start looking down on your people in the village too. You internalize that, right? You internalize that. You start saying, you know what? I'm going to learn how to dress. And you go back and then you go home where you were born and raised. And you start looking at your people and you go, oh my God, y'all don't know how to use knife and fork. I'm not going to put my hand in that bowl and eat with you. And oh, why don't you people do this? Because now you're becoming a westernized Negro. You're becoming a westernized Negro. Your values are changing. And now you're going back to your village and you're looking down on your people that brought you up, fed you, nurtured you, and brought you to where you are. But because you got bullied, you've internalized it, and now you're projecting it onto others. And now you're angry at the grandfathers of the people who bullied you for not forcing your grandfather to be like their grandfather. That's what it is. You're going to be angry that they didn't go in their cock diesel with their guns drawn and say, tell your wife to put on a bra and a shirt, excuse my language, and tell, these people to start to put the shrines away and be like us and do it by force. It was impossible for the Liberian government to do that. Impossible. The country would have ended then. You think the 1980 coup was bad? If they had tried that nonsense, in 1847. If they had even tried it in 1947, Liberia would not even exist on the map. You think that our people were weak and pitiful sitting in that rainforest? Do you know what we had endured for centuries? Do you know the kind of warriors? Do you know how we conquered the French military? That a Liberian military we weren't able in our Liberian vernacular? What do you take us for? Some of us. You know, so being bullied is not apartheid. You know, classism is not apartheid. Wealth disparity is not apartheid. These are injustices. These are, you know, you can look at things, if you have a communist mindset, you can say, you know, capitalism, you know, there should be no rich and poor, everybody should be equal to your business. But whatever you say, it is not apartheid. Apartheid is a system of laws that makes it illegal, that made it illegal for African people to marry European people, vice versa. It made it illegal for them to go to the same schools. It made it illegal for them to freaking go to the same restaurants, live in the same neighborhoods. That never happened in Liberia. You don't adopt children, native children, and say it's apartheid. It makes no sense.
Are you saying that I said it was apartheid?
No,
or is
no,
this
I'm
somebody else
talking in
comment?
general, Elvis. This isn't
Okay.
addressing you. I didn't even know you came back
No,
on.
but Elvis,
I'm just
Elvis,
talking in
people,
general.
right, Elvis? There are people that say that the Americans enslaved the natives and there was apartheid.
Yeah, I'm not saying. I've
we
never
got
heard
people
you
in
say
the
that.
gallery saying that right now.
Yeah, I just want to be clear. I'm not saying that Elvis said those things. I didn't mean to come across that way. I'm just talking in general terms. I'm addressing the general sentiment that we come from an apartheid country. I think that is propaganda and it is a blatant lie. That's not true. And yes, people did get bullied. People got bullied, and that, you know, you can't marry my daughter because your name's Akpo Flomo. Yes, that happened. I also know, you know, there's you could ask anybody that's bi that will tell you, say, oh, my daughter can't marry a Pella man, or a Madingo person, or will say, no, my daughter can't marry a Coup person. This is what human beings do. Is that apartheid?
I wanted to ask you a question, Ms. Carl.
Mm-hmm.
Dinus brought up this name, and I think you touched on it on a couple of weeks ago on your
Mm-hmm.
show about the name Gray, the vine name Gray.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he was saying that this guy changed his name because of, I think he said the white man. He changed his name from his native name, which is a vine name, to I guess a Westernized European
You
name.
talking about Akaris Gray?
You know, you talked about this on the Liberian History Channel on Focus on Liberia about the Gray
No,
name,
he had
the
a
Viking.
European, something like John Gray or something. It was definitely
Well,
English.
the
John
name
Gray.
Gray, the name Gray. So you have to remember the human mouth can only make so many sounds, right? So gray or gray is not necessarily gray like the color.
Okay.
Right? So you've got gay, glay, you've got so many names that sound like that along the coast. This is an indigenous name. Now they spell it Gray, but I think it was more pronounced Glay, because when you go to older texts, you've got Bob Glay, you got, and then they say Bob Gray or Ba Glay, Ba, and then, you know.
Okay, so it wasn't Bob Gray, it was Bob.
Ba, and then you start saying Bob. But the name Gray, like Akaris Musa Gray, you know, that's a vine name. Gray is a vine name. Because the name, there's Prince Gray existed in Liberia before 1822. There was a son of a monarch in Cape Mount that the British referred to as Prince Gray. And that name is just too prevalent. And you've got King Gray, that was also another Bai ruler that was located at I think what is now Painesville. So that name is too prominent among the people. I don't speak Bai, but I am convinced that is a native name. Our representative Akaris Gray, that is his native name, not Akaris. I don't know where he got that from. And his name was actually Musa, because he's Bai. His family background is Muslim, and he changed it to Moses. But his name was Musa Gray, you know, when he was young, and now it's Akaris Moses Gray when he went to Monrovia to go to school. So a lot of times too, the people change their names when they go to school because they don't want to get bullied. Not because it's forced. You go into school, you want to get the girls, or you want to get, you know, whatever accepted into, you know, you don't want somebody trying to pronounce, you know, whatever, right? My nephew's name is Yikizi. It's the most beautiful sound I've ever heard in my life. He's proud of his name. But other people might say, no, I'm going to go change my name to Billy because I don't want people bullying me for having this name. It is what it is.
Okay. All right, we got a Yahya Bay. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Yahya.
Peace, brother. Peace to the panel. Dynast, I've been following you. You're the first person I follow, brother, so it's an honor to be on your show. Real quick, I want to give a shout out to the sister. You say your name is Caw. Quick question. Do you have a YouTube page?
I do. I don't post any content on it though, but yeah, I have a YouTube page.
Yeah, you got to plug your show on Focus on Liberia.
What'd you say?
No, she has a show that you can follow. She gives history lessons on Liberia. That's what I'm telling her to plug that show. So if you want to follow her,
yes, please.
Well, Focus on Liberia on Facebook. That's true. I should plug it. So you can actually follow them on YouTube. The platform's on there, but
okay. Yeah. My one question in pertaining to this topic, what other roles do you see that the Americos played in either helping to establish or to break up the union of the Liberians? And that's my only question, and I'm going to log off and listen from
Can you elaborate? What do you mean by break up the union of the Liberians? What do you mean by that?
So you have two perspectives that I hear from people who argue about these points on the Americos in Liberia. One perspective is that they came and tried to intertwine with the locals, and then one perspective is they came and tried to like dominate the environment of Liberia. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that I want us to understand is the chronology of Liberian history. It's very long, right? So our history with the repatriated and recaptured Africans began in 1822. And so you had settlements along the coast. And most of those settlements along the coast were integrated. You had recaptured Africans, you had indigenous who had converted to Christianity living among the settlers, and you had the repatriated African Americans, and later on people from the Caribbean and so on. So the diversity, the Pan-Africanism that occurred on the coast was incredible. They did not really penetrate into the interior until the 20th century. The people in the interior were coming to the coast and trading. Huge caravans bringing ivory, fabric. We made this very fine cloth that Europeans value. Grains, rice. One of the reasons a lot of our people, like we're getting Sierra Leone, were taken into slavery is because we had these massive rice plantations. So we used to bring rice, we used to bring food, other valuable things from the interior to the coast. But we did not allow the American government to, I'm not sorry, American, that was horrible, the Liberian government to penetrate in the other direction. The very first person to penetrate the interior districts of Liberia was Benjamin Joseph Knight Anderson in 1868 on his expedition to Musadu, which was at the mouth of the headwaters, source waters of the St. Paul River. So the idea that these people came in, guns blasting, conquered people is a complete false narrative. It didn't happen. Most of the infiltration, not infiltration, but most of the incorporation occurred over a slow period of time. I don't know how many of you have heard of Queen Suakoko with Bong County, what is now Bong County. She was part of the North Central Territory at that time. That area of Liberia was just called North Central Liberia. There were no counties because it had not been annexed fully, meaning it was not under the control of the Liberian government. They were fighting a lot of wars between themselves. Suakoko went to the Liberian government for help in protecting herself and her people against other people that they were having military conflict with. And it was through the assistance of the Liberian government that Suakoko and her people were able to be liberated from these rolling wars, our people call them, which are wars that are constantly occurring. Especially with the end of the slave trade, there was a lot of readjustments and realignments and a lot of bloodbaths occurring among different ethnic groups and clans and nations. So you have to think of this as being these nations within the Liberian territory that were sovereign and self-governed. So once that happened, Suakoko was basically the conduit for the Liberian government to penetrate the North Central Territory. This is in the 20th century. Liberia was established in 1847. So they're not even able to penetrate that part of the country until the 20th century. So Liberians need to realize this. They were not allowed to, they did not have the ability to. In fact, when Benjamin Anderson in 1868 just went on an exploratory mission, his life was in constant jeopardy. They could have killed him and his entire expedition team and nothing would have come out of it. There would have been nothing the Liberian government could have done in retaliation. Benjamin Anderson, Joseph Knight Anderson survived to Musadu strictly on the goodwill of those who allowed him to pass through their territories. And he said it continuously through his journal. He was at the will and force of the kings whose territories he was passing through. And the fact that and many of the kings that he named, King Momoru, and all of these powerful sovereigns that were long distance traders that had massive wealth networks and trading networks, these are people we should be discussing in Liberian history. You know, these are the people we need to be learning about in school instead of this constant, oh, we were pitiful savages, we weren't doing anything. I mean, I think it's deliberate that the incredible power and ability of the indigenous people, the power that they had is suppressed. That information is suppressed, and people don't even know, you know, any of this. Even the British, the French, as powerful world powers as they were not able to do the things that people accuse this little band of settlers on the coast of being able to do in Liberia. I mean, Samori Toure Wosulu, look it up. Look at the amount of area he commanded. The only reason the French were even able to bring him down is because, again, as they always do, they weaponized his own people against him. But had that not happened, had it not been other Africans fighting on behalf of the French, Wosulu would still be existing today.
I have a question. I have a question for you, Ms. Cole.
Yes.
Yes. On this platform, we have a lot of people who think that the coup was the worst thing that ever happened to Liberia, and you know it shouldn't have happened. Personally, you're from Nimba County, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the majority of the people in Nimba celebrated a coup?
No.
You say no?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I'll probably disagree with you on that.
I think the celebrations of the coup occurred in town, and it was mostly the student movements, that the people who were incited against their country during the Rice Riots and whatnot. I think that's where that came from.
And please speak on the Rice Riot, because that was an important part.
I think that could be another topic. I want to do that topic justice, because I do actually I can actually pick that whole thing apart based on what has been declassified from the CIA papers and many other documents that I have. That is a complete topic by itself, and so you know, it is something I do need to address with the respect it deserves, because again, Talbert trying to assert control of Liberian resources for the benefit of Liberian people, there was a process of sabotage involved in that. And then again, using student groups and inciting them and you know, basically infiltrating them, using people who, some of which are still alive today, you know, promising them things, you know, you will be president, we will give you power.
People were killed in the streets, were they not? during the Rice Riot?
I mean, yes, there were some people killed in the streets, and Talbert had to have Sekou Touré help him because it was understood what was behind it. It was understood what was behind it. It was an insurgency. It was an attempt to overthrow the government. Talbert was very much aware. And, you know, a lot of times when we talk about people, we try to make them out to be victims. What would happen in the United States of America if you tried to overthrow the government?
When you say overthrow, what actions was taken that you would classify as being?
So Elvis, do you want us to turn the show into a show about the Rice Riots? We can, because
well,
I can.
and
we can. I mean, we can come back and discuss it on another day and give it the true justice it deserves.
Right.
But
I'm asking you this question, Ms. Carl.
Here's my issue, Elvis.
Go ahead.
I don't know if I would have done things differently from what Talbot did, knowing what I know, and knowing what I know that he knew. I don't think there's any government in the world that would have done things differently from what he did. Right here in the United States, the government kills people all the time in the streets. You know, is it right? And you're talking about in the 1970s. You know, look at what happened in Nicaragua. Look at what happened all over the world. Would this happen?
People say the same thing about the civil rights movement, right?
People were killed. People were killed in the
civil
rights movement. People were killed in the civil rights movement. People were killed in the civil rights movement, and the civil rights movement was very much justified. The Rice Riots, think about what you're saying. You want to compare people getting in the streets over the price of rice, which was artificially hiked as sabotage, and there was instigation. You want to compare that to people asserting their humanity? Is that the conversation we're having right now? Is that reasonable? Is that rational?
Right. You're talking. You know, there's a
saying. I mean, you want to make an analogous comparison between the civil rights movement.
I'm not equating the two things. I'm saying whenever people protest, right? You have people of opposing view that would say, well, these, you know, quote unquote, these Negroes, you know, they're trying to overthrow our government. They use that same saying. States use that exact reasoning to quash down any form of protest. That's one of the biggest reasons that they give.
Okay, so here's what we'll do. We can have a different show about the Rice Riots, but I will say this to you. Rioting over the price of rice, throwing stones because someone has instigated this, which is well documented, this is not analogous to a civil rights movement. They were not rioting for jobs. They were not rioting for human rights. It was about rice prices. Just think about this for a minute. Just think about this for a minute. And the outcome that they were looking for, it didn't even make any sense in the greater scheme of things, because the government was already addressing issues, and they didn't do this during the Tubman era when they actually were oppressed. They didn't do this during the Tubman era when they would have been justified to do so. It just doesn't make any sense. But we will talk about that another time, because I have a lot of information, because I dug this up myself, because some of these things were the catalyst to what led to the coup and eventually the murder of my father. So it is something that I've studied extensively, and I've also talked to people who were involved, who were students at the time, who were incited and who received visits and promises. So I know what happened. And a lot of Liberians living today are living with a lot of guilt. A lot of guilt. And the sick part of the whole thing is that brilliant young people like yourself are still carrying the torch of propaganda that destroyed their country. You become now the vision bearers of the propaganda that destroyed your country. because
That's
there's no
a
counter. Because
that's a strong statement right there. And
I
let me
believe it.
just
That's why I
respond to
said
it.
it. That's why I said
Let
it.
me respond to it quickly. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like you said, you come from a different side of the country, not so different than my ancestral homeland, which is in Grandview. We're
Mm-hmm.
neighbors, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we have different perspective on certain things. And I will say this: you read about the TRC report, right? When I brought it up on this platform, that we haven't had the healing process that we need to have as a country. You know, there are grievances that the natives have against the American Liberians, whether people want to minimize it, whether they think we're overreacting, but it's a fact. Our people have grievances, you know, and we haven't had that time of reconciliation in that country. You agree with that, right? You want to see the TRC report implemented, you know, especially part of the part that calls for reconciliation amongst the different groups of people.
Elvis, and Elvis, I have a question because, and I brought this up to Miss Carr earlier. When you say your people, see again, it's this indigenous population is all a monolith versus the Americos.
No, no.
Does
When I say my
every well, I'm
when I
saying
say
does
my
every I'm saying does every single tribe as a whole agree with what happened in 1980? You know, because again, it's just Americos versus the indigenous population. Like the indigenous population is just its own nation, own monolithic nation.
you
So
know, and Dinus, that's why I invited you on the platform. I already talked to the host of that, the Focus on Liberia, and we're trying to schedule a time where you and Kyle could come on the platform, where it's
okay.
majority Liberian audience, and you have people calling in who will tell you their views. Some will agree
Okay.
with me, but I'm sure a lot more would so a lot more would agree with me than disagree with me, right? So I want you to come into a space where you have a majority of Liberians, most of them who are native, and they'll call and tell you.
Elvis, Elvis, if I can ask a question, the natives who call in, are they currently in Liberia or are they in America? And
Well,
I'm asking
most of them will be in the United States, but that doesn't take away from their experience what happened
that.
with them
I
when
mean,
they were
I
in
get it,
Liberia.
but it's just
Right.
Elvis. The problem is you know, 1980, the coup happens. I'm guessing the certain members of the indigenous community thought it was going to go, and you know, there was a reason for it, and the outcome was going to be a certain direction, and it doesn't work out, and then they come to America. That's the point where I just kind of get instead of
So
staying
this,
and
yeah.
working things out, and you know, I just
Yeah.
go
Let
ahead,
me just
go
come
ahead.
in. Sorry, but what we're dealing with is a generation of people who are victims of a massive Cold War disinformation campaign. They know absolutely nothing about their own history and the context that they exist in. When I say nothing, I mean nothing. If you ask any Liberian, an average Liberian, not any Liberian, the average Liberian, if there were ever what we call native Liberians holding senatorial and representative seats in Liberia before 1980, the average person is going to say no. So the entire premise of their paradigm, their belief system is based on false information. And so for Elvis to say, oh, if you call on the show, most of the people are going to agree with me, of course they are. Because everyone has been fed the same stuff. And they haven't bothered to verify the information.
But Miss
So
Carl, those people
I'm
lived
going
through
to
that
finish my
time. They
statement
lived
and
the
then you can come
experience.
in.
They
I'm
lived
going
that
to finish
experience.
and then you can come in with all due respect. So what ends up happening is we keep repeating this. And when I said vision bearers for the propaganda that destroyed our country, that is exactly what it is. If you don't know that Dosen was an indigenous Liberian, he was vice president of the country. If you don't know that most of these representatives and senators were born in Liberia of so-called indigenous background, if you don't know these things and you think that people didn't have the right to vote until after 1980, your entire worldview is based on a false paradigm. It's a completely the point of view isn't even valid because it's based on a lie.
No, that's not my point of view. That
I'm not
we
speaking
weren't allowed.
about you,
Okay,
Elvis.
so,
I'm talking about the statement you made about if Dynast and Kala were to go on focus on Liberia, many people would call in and repeat the lie. And of course they will. And it's because they haven't taken the time to learn for themselves. And many Liberians don't even know that they have history that they can read. And most of the people that I interact with are literally, they learn their history like it's gossip on the street.
but some of these people were alive during the time. I'm pretty young, and yourself, I think you're pretty young. But some of these people who live during that time frame, they'll give you their own personal experiences that they went through, even if their fathers and mothers' experience that they went that they had to deal with. So
So,
But
for
my point.
example, the experience about your father and your grandfather, is that what you mean? Stuff like
but
No,
that?
no, I'm taking it
Elvis,
away
if I
from.
can
Well,
Elvis,
hold
if
on,
I
Dennis.
can, no, but Elvis, hold on, let me interject, Elvis. But again, my question is, if you guys supported the coup in 1980, why did you guys see it through all the way to its completion, even through the Civil War in 1989? You know, the I guess the next war was in 1992. I don't know why come to America after just, I guess, 9 years after this 1980 coup.
When
Once
you
things started to kind of
Okay, but and no offense to Miss Call, but I'll ask the same question to her. You said her parents came to the United States to study, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah,
That's
studying
why
go back.
that's why your parents came here, right?
That's what
Right. So
let me say this
people,
quickly. Most Liberians would come here, go to school, and go back
right. So
and
after
teach and do other stuff. Yeah.
right. So after a war, what happened? You have a lot of people who were refugees, and people apply for asylums. Other other apply for resettlement in the United States. So when you ask that question, Diane, it's not as if to say Liberia was a paradise, and most Liberians should have stayed in Liberia because it was a paradise before the coup, and it became this dystopia republic after the coup. People who were living in Liberia in the hinterlands, or people who didn't have the means, would have loved to travel to the United States even during before the 1980s. So don't say that as if to say we caused our own demise and thereby we started coming to the United States because of
Can
the
you
coup.
repeat that, Elvis? You're saying that people in the hinterlands would have loved to travel to the United States before the coup?
Of course, people who knew that, and again, that's where I'll pause on that.
So,
I'll stop
so,
right there
so
because
let me ask you something, Elvis. How many people in the United States before 1980 had passports to travel outside of the United States? I mean, that's a really bizarre
and that's why I say
analogy.
I would stop there because I
Human
made that
beings,
same.
yeah, I mean, the
I would
world,
stop there because I made the same statement on the show, and Dinus was making fun of it because I said most of our people,
I mean,
they didn't even know how to
being
travel
able
during
to get on a
before then.
plane,
Right.
being able to get on a plane before 1980 and travel across the ocean was an extremely privileged opportunity. Most people on the planet did not have such an opportunity.
And that's what I was trying to say. Our people didn't have the opportunities before that time to even travel to the United States. Most people got here through resettlement, through refugees, and sent for their families.
no, no,
After
no, no,
that,
no. My no, no. Elvis, my question was if I guess Liberia under American rule was so rough and they were so barbaric and forced name changes and all this, why weren't native like in the indigenous population who disagreed with the American Liberians, why weren't they trying to leave Liberia in mass under American rule versus in 1989?
because
That
of
was
the
my
war,
question.
people
No,
But
no,
left.
no.
but you guys
Listen,
said it was
listen.
so bad under American rule.
Let me just say something. Let me answer your question, Dinus.
Hmm.
Before 1980,
Uh-huh.
even under Ahmed Sekou Touré's rule in Guinea, and under what's his name in Sierra Leone and all these places. Before 1980, when these countries were newly independent, before they were independent, when they were under colonialism, the people in Liberia were not going to Guinea and Sierra Leone in mass. The migration was in the reverse. Many people left the French territory and the British territory and fled to Liberia. the pattern of migration of our African neighbors was to Liberia. And the reason I'm not talking about Ghana and all these faraway places, because we have the same ethnicity as the people in our neighboring countries. We have, the same ethnicities in Ivory Coast, the Grable, all of the Cloud-speaking groups, including your ethnic group, Elvis, and then my ethnic group is in Guinea, and my husband's ethnic group is in Sierra Leone. The migration was towards Liberia before the coup. And so you had Guinea Pella people, Guinea Bandi people, Guinea Lama people, Guinea Mano people, Guinea Madingo people coming to Liberia before the coup. Do you know why that is? It's because Liberia, you had liberty in Liberia. You were not actually oppressed in Liberia. And more importantly, land sovereignty for indigenous people in Liberia that didn't exist under colonial rule. This is a fact. And I'm not saying, again, that people didn't get bullied. But there's a difference between being bullied and not being able to farm on your land or having your land taken from you. There's a difference between being bullied and not being able to go to school. And the literacy rate among Pella people in Liberia, among Mano people in Liberia, among Kron people in Liberia was far higher than the same ethnic groups under the colonial governments. Women, indigenous women in Liberia were educated at a far greater rate than indigenous women of the same ethnic groups in the neighboring countries. I always like to tell people, where is Guinea's Jewel Howard Taylor? There are Pella people in Guinea in much greater number than Liberia. Where has Guinea produced a woman who has become vice president or even from the Pella ethnic group or done anything of any importance in Guinea? Show me the Pella person in Guinea that is better off than Pella people in Liberia. Show me the Mano people in Guinea that are in general, I'm not talking about individual, one-off cases, that in general is better off. My relatives in Guinea, because all of us that come from these borders, cities like Ganta and, people in Cape Town and whatever, we have relatives, distant relatives, extended family members that live across the border in these other countries. Until the war, we didn't go to them, right? They came to us to farm, to be able to go to the hospital. So this concept, we have to look at the whole picture. We have to free our minds of things that are clearly not true. Beware of the single narrative. You don't have to get on a plane to escape Liberia. Why weren't we rushing to our cousins' villages across the river, across the Kavala, across the St. John River, across the Mano River? That separates Sierra Leone from Liberia, that separates Liberia from Guinea, that separates Liberia from Ivory Coast. Who was going to stop us? We didn't do it because things were better on the Liberia side. That's a fact.
Okay, and Dinus, I think I sent you an email, and hopefully you can respond to that email.
Okay,
and maybe Miss Call could get on the show as well, because I'm trying to get him to come on that platform, and maybe you can simulcast it to your platform so African Americans can get a view of what some Liberians think too. And like I said, people have different perspectives. Miss Call has her perspective on the issues, and I'm sure a lot of people think like her, but there's another side to to this issue. Elvis, and I want the other side to be heard. I want them to be heard.
Well, see, Elvis, I have
experiences.
Elvis, I have no problem coming to coming on your guys' show. I have no problem in hearing the other perspective. But African Americans,
don't put it in air court. What do you mean?
No, but I have to, Elvis, because we already know the other perspective was these Black Americans came and they enslaved the natives. I mean I'm serious. That's the other perspective. Black Americans came, apartheid, and enslaved the natives. I mean, Leo's in the chat room right now. Here we go. Under America, the hinterland. Hold on, let me read this. He's been in the chat room all day.
Who's that?
America, my friend from Cote d'Ivoire, I think he's from. Under the America, the hinterland of Liberia was totally ignored and not developed. These people she is talking about had no contact with the Americas unless they go to Monrovia. And see, this is the problem with comments like this. I travel all over West Africa, Elvis. Okay, when I was in Mali in 2014, there was no developed road from Bamako to Ségou to Sévaré. I mean, pretty much everywhere in Senegal, there is no straight developed highway or road from Dakar to Touba. So this argument, as if the norm all over Africa that all of every country you went to was completely developed, it's just a lie.
It is a lie, which is why I'm comparing. Yeah, which is why I'm comparing. You know, the condition of mono people in Guinea. And here's the thing: I'm glad my ancestors were ignored. I'm glad nobody came and executed them, like what was done in the United States, and took their land. I'm glad that my ancestors were not victims of mass genocide like the people in Namibia. I'm glad they were not put on or in concentration camps they call townships like they did in South Africa. You're talking about our people were completely ignored. They were not children. Okay, my great-great-grandfathers were human beings, and they were sovereign human beings, and they did not see anything wrong with the way that they were living their lives. So one thing I am, first and foremost, is I am African. Regardless of where I'm born, I cannot take that out of myself. This is who I am. My place of birth and citizenship does not erase me from the dignity of my past, of my heritage. And I am fortunate to know who I am. And I'm fortunate to descend from sovereign Africa.
Ms. Khan, I think a call just came in because your volume went down again.
All right.
Okay. All right, try again. Go ahead and say something and see if it's
Can you hear
I was
us?
gonna say, go ahead and say something, Ms. Carr, because your volume is down.
Want me to say something?
Yeah,
Okay.
let's do this. No, do this. Leave and come back in like last time.
Oh, my voice is going again? Okay.
Yeah. Leave and come back in,
Okay, we'll do.
All right, guys, do me a favor. Hit the like button again, please. Hit that like button. Everyone, thank you so much for joining. We're gonna close soon. Let's see here. Let's bring her back on. She comes back in. No, we're not mute. We're just waiting for Ms. Carr to come back in.
All right. But yeah, Dennis, try to get on that show, please, because I really want you guys to hear.
I will.
Because I respect, that's why I'm so quiet tonight, because I respect the lady. She's very intelligent. She's a smart woman, but certainly there's a whole nother side to this story, and a lot of people have a different, perspective.
I mean, Elvis, I think we've gotten the story. And Ms. Carr, I was going to say this too. When I was in Tanzania in 2011 in Arusha, which is like, I want to say like the third largest city in Tanzania. It's a pretty large sized city. It's the gateway to Kilimanjaro and Serengeti. And to Kenya, there was only one stoplight in the entire city, just one. So again, just this argument that, Liberia was undeveloped, Monrovia was developed, and it's the American Liberians' fault, as if all of Africa was just fully developed in 1980. It's just ridiculous. Let me bring out America's First Rifleman. America's First Rifleman, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hey, thank you for having me on the panel. Shout out to Miss Cow. Is that how you say Cow? Really loving the history that you're dropping. You're actually dropping verifiable facts, so I really appreciate that as well. The only thing I'm going to say, and I'm gone, is that the attitude of Elvis, I have the same attitude towards Africans, because and this is before, and I never was FBA or Tariq Nasheed, but once I started reading history, I came to the conclusion that oh, you know, I'm African American, so I'm distinct. I'm different from Africans. I got some African in me, but I'm like way super different. And I was like, they sold us. They betrayed us and sold us. And so I just got this simplistic view, and I got it from reading it. And then there's other people saying they sold us, and it just becomes this just cycle of just being upset and angry, and it just doesn't get you anywhere. And especially in how I kind of came down and became a Pan-Africanist, is because I actually read the history and was like, okay, it was a lot of gray area. It was very nuanced, a lot of nuance and all that. And there were different groups of whatever, but there were also Africans standing against slavery as well. So, having that nuanced view helped me understand things a lot better. So I just would say, I think this is where Elvis is coming from. Is really just that resentment for what happened, and hopefully it'll take some time, and he can kind of get over that and kind of unite or whatever. But yeah, I think that's just kind of I kind of see where he's coming from.
Thank you for that, bro. Because I'm only giving a different perspective. I could come on this live and say, you know what, and agree with the.
No, you're not really. You're giving your perspective, but they're coming with facts. That's the only thing. Like, yeah, we understand your perspective, but we're actually having a conversation where we're trying to parse out actual details of what happened. That's the difference.
Yes, not just. So Elvis, listen. I have relatives who are watching this show right now, who are probably cringing at what I'm saying. And it's simply because they have not looked at the full evidence of what I'm trying to present. And yes, your perspective, your feelings are valid, but they're not necessarily based on all of the facts and the full details and the full perspective. That's all. And so
the reason I even came on this platform was because there's this narrative that the native Liberians had no reason to want to overthrow the American Liberian government. They had no reason at all. And I'm trying to tell you that
I agree with that. I don't think they had any reason to overthrow the government. I 100% believe, based on everything
a lot of people would disagree with you.
They will disagree with me. I want someone who has examined all of the evidence that I have examined to disagree with me. And then I will respect the disagreement. But you can't just disagree with something that someone has spent many, many years researching, without you coming with data and the same facts. So you can refute what I'm presenting, but you must also have an evidence-based position. Your feelings.
That's why I want us to bring this conversation to our people.
Your opinions are okay. Everyone's entitled to them, but it is not appropriate to try to use something that is not based in actual evidence and research to refute something that is. That is not what is done in any type of academic or intellectual discourse. So my position is definitely not, what it is not based on is sentiment. What it is not based on is, my feelings. And one thing I do, and what everyone should do when they're studying history, is remove your feelings. Suspend your feelings and be as objective as possible. And that's the only way to really be able to understand. So one of the things we have to also realize is we're studying time periods that the worldview of people was not what it is today. Being African, is something that was imposed upon us. We didn't think of ourselves that way in the 1700s, the 1800s, right? We thought of ourselves as Yoruba or Klau or Madingo or Malinka, I should say, and Fulani or whatever. So a lot of the problem is we take our present mindset and try to project it on people in the past, and it doesn't work. It'll skew your analysis and your understanding if you do that.
and that's what I'm saying. We want to have this show, this discussion on a platform where you have a lot of Liberians, because this is kind of like an echo chamber for African Americans, and they have this idea that, you know, Liberia was a great, you know, country that
No,
was run by African Americans, and the native ruined it
No, that's
because they
not
were
true,
jealous of the African
That's
Americans.
not true, Elvis. That's not true. African Americans are told that these coon Black Americans, fresh out of slavery, went to Liberia and enslaved the natives. That's what we're taught. Like this is like that's what we're taught, and that's
That's
why
America.
America.
And I
That's why
disputed that.
America.
I
That's
said it
why
wasn't
America
slavery.
first.
It wasn't slavery, but there was definitely discrimination going on there.
No, but
There
listen, I'm
was.
telling you that the narrative is that we went to Liberia and imposed, and we became the slave master.
And
That's
that's
what
not
we're
right.
taught, and that's
That's
what we're
not,
taught. That's what we're taught. Hey, Blue Sox, go ahead, Blue Sox, go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Hey, I'm
All
gonna
right.
get off. Thank you.
Okay.
I want to tell. Is it Ka?
yes, good job.
Yes. Thank no. And I want to say Fanbule. Is that your surname?
yes.
Okay. But I'll call you Miss Ka. I love everything you've told. Since I was in like high school, I went to a high school college program, and in their library, they had like these really old, frayed books about the history of Liberia, and I just read them up, and I read about a lot of stuff you're talking about. And so, I mean, I heard Elvis on here before, and the way he describes Liberia is the way a lot of Black Americans describe America. They don't they kind of pick on like the bad stuff of Black American history, but they don't know their own history and what their own people did, and the things like, what did your great great grandfather do after slavery ended? What does your grandfather do? What does your great great grandmother do? They don't know. They don't speak on the greatness that their family did, or the small accomplishments their family did, and those are the people they're directly related to. But they want to pick on this victimhood mentality and run with it, and then just kind of paint broadly the whole thing. Like, as a Black American, I look at Liberia as like, in this whole world where all these people are pushing white supremacy and all this other stuff, it's like, here were some Black people. Some of them voluntarily went. Some of them only got freedom because if you leave Liberia, we will free you, and we'll give you some money. We'll give you some seeds. There's letters
Mhm.
of people writing their old masters back in Kentucky, back in Mississippi, back in Virginia, and they're like basically sponsoring them over there. And so I kind of look at that, and I'm just like, there's a whole lot of nuance that doesn't get spoke on when it comes to Liberia, when it comes to race relations, when it comes to how we think of like the whole 19th century to this white supremacy, you know, imperial Star Wars empire where Blacks had no opportunities. But I feel he's a Liberian version of how Blacks are like that in America, where everything's bad, nothing was good, we accomplished nothing. But it's just like, what did your people do? What were your people doing? How did your
Why
people,
why do you still
move through that
exist?
adversity?
Why are you even alive? You
Yeah,
gotta
exactly, exactly. If it's that bad, like, why are you even alive? But I, w- but you just speak on the history so well, and I like, because I have these conversations with my brother. They're low key arguments, and he doesn't know the history, but he sounds like Elvis when we have these conversations. And from what I've read, Liberia wasn't no white supremacist outpost in West Africa, and they just put it there so the day could come where they can exploit the resources and pull out the rubber and pull out the iron and do all these other things. Like, if that was the case, then how come Liberia wasn't conquering? They weren't using it as a lever to kind of push into the rest of West Africa. But I say all that to say, given the fact that Liberia kind of wasn't in that place to really assert itself over the natives, um, how do we, like, was there ever a possibility that, let's say we had some conscious, like, they go over there, they're free, and now they're just like, you know what, no, we got the white man off our back, and now we like looking at the rest of West Africa, they're looking at the
so
Capelle, they're looking at the Grebels, they're looking at the Crew, they're looking at the Kissy, they're looking at the Vai and the Gola, and
yeah,
like, okay, we gonna integrate them, and we just gonna push out further and further and further, and we just gonna take all of West Africa in, and we gonna take over this whole show. We
that
gonna
was
we
the
we gonna build
plan.
Wakanda
That was
over
the
here. Was there
plan.
ever a possibility that could have happened?
Yes, yes, there was a possibility that could happen, and that was a plan. That was a plan with 1847. That white star on that blue background represented liberation on, for the terminology of that time period, on the dark continent. The plan and the vision of those who created Liberia was really to push this republic, because you have to remember, this is before the partitioning of Africa. This is before the Berlin Conference. This is before the Europeans carved the continent. So their plan was to unite the entire continent under this republic. A lot of people don't know that. That's exactly what this flag represents. That star represented, that place of liberty, that place of what in their minds was a modern republic for the entire continent. So they really did want the buy-in of the people all around. That's what they wrote down. So this isn't, the thing about it is, these people were literate. They wrote their thoughts on paper. Elijah Johnson wrote his thoughts on paper. Hillary Teague wrote his thoughts on paper. We have a wealth of information and a window into the minds of the founders of the republic. So there's really no reason for there to be ambiguity around why they established the country, why they asserted their independence. Was this the birth? Elijah Johnson is the father of Pan-Africanism. You talk about people who came later that make reference to Elijah Johnson, make reference to Hillary Teague, 1847. Liberia had some of the greatest African intellectuals both visiting there and interacting with those who relocated there. So what you're saying, I just started clapping because it's a brilliant question. And the answer is, it was a possibility, but it had to have had the buy-in of everyone. And that process was thwarted by the Berlin Conference. Part of the reason Benjamin Joseph Knight Anderson went to Musad, risked his life to penetrate to the interior, to go all the way to what he called the western capital of the Mandingos. He went there because he was looking to build an alliance, gain knowledge from the people. And if you see the reverence and the respect that Anderson had, this is in the 1800s. You have a Baltimore-born, a guy born in Brick City, Baltimore, went to Liberia. He was born free. His parents were free. He went to Liberia with his mother and his sister and joined the military and learned all this stuff and decided to become an explorer, went into the interior. This is a guy from Brick City, Baltimore, the urban center. And he was able to go penetrate the interior where no one born outside of Africa had ever been before. And the respect and reverence he had for the people when he interacted with them, what he wrote down. Take that and compare it to what British and other European explorers did at the same time in other places, where they were talking about the people as if they weren't even human beings. It's because Anderson saw these people as he saw himself. They looked like him. This is undeniable. This is why some of this stuff is ridiculous. These were Black people in a Black land where everyone looked very similar. And the only difference between Benjamin Joseph Knight Anderson and the indigenous people he encountered on his trip to Musadu was the manner of dress. The clothes they were wearing is what separated them in appearance, nothing else. So
I appreciate.
Yeah.
I appreciate everything you had to say. Like I said, you should do documentaries or something, like just have them produced about Liberia. A lot of people think Ghana was the first independent country. I mean, in the post-colonial world, yeah. But what about Ethiopia? What about Liberia? And then Ethiopia just never got conquered till the 30s. And Liberia, that was a thing. Like we made that
what
happen.
Dynasty is doing here is powerful. I mean,
it really is. And shout out to you, Dennis.
Yes.
Are you related to Boyman
I'll say
family?
this. My Blue Sox, I'll say this. My father, like my family, used to go to Liberia a lot before the coup, and I have pictures of my dad and my mom and my sister at Mamba Point. I was trying to pull them up. I'm trying to find it, but yeah.
That's
So
so cool.
I want to say Black Americans, because I mean, I want to say in Liberia, like Black Americans were. In fact, Ebony and Jet used to feature Liberia a lot
Yeah.
in their. In fact, I have some of these.
Steve Tolbert's wife was on the cover of Ebony magazine with her beautiful self. You know,
Right.
yeah. So Steve Tolbert's wife, beautiful Madingo woman, and this is the whole thing. You know, the whole day they talk about. You know, Steve Tolbert was married to a Madingo woman whose father, you know, was the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, or the Minister of Foreign Affairs. You know, so we really ignore evidence that contradicts what we've been told to believe.
Could I ask you a question, Ms. Carr? Are you
Yeah.
related to Boyman family?
I am a married Fambula, meaning that's my
Okay.
husband's name, and Boima Fambula, Auntie Miata Fambula, HB Senior, and my father-in-law were brothers. So Boima and Dr. HB Fambula Jr. is my husband's cousin.
Okay. Do you think he agrees with your perspective on Liberia?
Yes. I think that he's an educated person, and I think that he has examined the evidence. And you know, I don't listen. Dr. Sawyer, who's one of my mentors, the late Dr. Sawyer, may his soul rest in peace. One of the things that he said, and it was published before he died, was that the coup was not necessary, and he knows why he said what he said.
But Dr. Fambula was a part of the Rice Riot, right? He helped organize it. He
So
was
was
part of
Dr.
those.
Sawyer, so were many people. So again, I'm
Right.
not going to speak
So
for Dr. Fambula. And in
right.
fact, Auntie Miata, I think, is watching the show from Accra. So Auntie Miata, if you're watching, please, you know, call in. She told me she would watch, so I don't know if she's asleep. It's very late. She probably went to sleep. But if she's still up and watching this, I'd like you to call in and give your opinion. I'm not going to tell you what Dr. Fambula believes, but I do know that he's educated, and his beliefs are based on information. And he also has a lot of firsthand accounts. But I do know for a fact his very close friend, late Dr. Sawyer, made the statement, publicly made the statement, that the coup was not necessary.
Right. And I would just encourage people to go on YouTube and look at Dr. Fambula's testimony at the TRC and listen to it in its entirety.
Yeah, and
get
the other thing,
his perspective on the issues.
That would be great. And then the other thing I want to point out too is that Dr. Fambula, his father was a phenomenal human being. This is a person who is a descendant of some very incredible people. On his mother's side, he's the descendant of Natia Burnell, who was a presidential candidate against a Grebelman, who was a presidential candidate against Tubman, excuse me. And then on his, of course, his father, the brilliant HB Senior, who you know, was a Pan-Africanist genius, really. So he is the progeny of two great family lines, indigenous family lines, and I have a world of respect for him, not because he's an in-law, but also because of the what he has done academically for Liberia. I don't agree with everything that he says, but I know and I respect that everything he says is coming from an informed perspective.
And by the Miss Ka, I would like to. When I was trying to look you up, I came across a Joseph Fambule who looked like he had a Florida Gator jersey on. I don't know if you're a football player or a runner.
They're all related. They're all related. They're all
and
the Fambula people. So I'm not Fambula by blood. I'm Fambula by marriage. But that entire family, they're all the same people. They're all cousins. They're all this. They all have the same great grandfather, and so they're all descendants from a district in Grand Cape Mount called Tiwa. And so all of these people come from the same lineage. They're the descendants of a very powerful person, and so they are many. They are numerous.
Okay, and I'll take my comments off the air, but my hope is one day Liberia will have a promising rugby team called the Lone Stars, and Ghana will have a promising rugby team called the Black Stars, and we can watch them play and go to the
That
Rugby
would
World
be cool.
Championship. And I will be rooting for Liberia, and if they don't make it, I will be rooting for Ghana.
I love it.
All right.
Ms. Carr, last question and we'll close out. Can you go into detail one more time in regards to the indigenous population not being allowed to vote? If that's true or not, or just...
So there was never a time when suffrage was denied to any group of people in Liberia. What happened is you have a territory which is under the control of indigenous people, and citizenship was not imposed upon anyone, but nor was it denied. So what ends up happening is people intentionally misinterpret things. Liberia was basically, as far as the government, before the 20th century, was the coastal areas. Those coastal areas were populated by citizens that of very diverse backgrounds. So you had many, in fact, the indigenous people in the coastal settlements clearly outnumbered the repatriated Africans and recaptured Africans. So the majority of citizens in Liberia before 1900 were indigenous. So the narrative that they were not allowed to vote is absurd. Now, my people in the North Central Territory, except where we were to move into the Liberian controlled areas, we're not really Liberians at all. We're just sovereign people living within the territory. Did we want to be Liberian citizens is a better question. That is the better question. Did we want to participate in this modern system of government? That didn't happen until after the partitioning of Africa, when we realized our autonomy, our sovereign autonomy, was no longer an option. When they conquered Samori Touré, indigenous Africans in those regions that had not been penetrated realized that our sovereignty was no longer an option, that we had to now subject ourselves to a modern republic. And it was either going to be France, or it was going to be England, or it was going to be Liberia. So the answer to your question is a complicated answer, because it's not simple, because there's not some monolithic group of people called indigenous. Never was there a law preventing anyone from being a citizen of Liberia because they were indigenous, because even when Liberia was established as a republic in 1847, there were indigenous people in the settlement that were among the first citizens, and they were in majority. So the answer to your question is yes and no. My ancestors were not citizens of Liberia in 1847, nor did they want to be, nor did they care to be. Were there indigenous people that were citizens and voting in 1847? Yes. Nimba didn't become a county until 1964. 1964 is when they broke up the North Central Territory and fully annexed it. 1964, that was President Tubman. That isn't because they didn't want these people to be part of Liberia, it's because the people themselves were under a certain system of government that they didn't want to let go of. And you have people who said, we fought for our land sovereignty, we fought against the French to keep this territory. We don't want you guys coming over here taxing us. We like this thing we've got going on here. You've got, videos of Professor Guanu and others, Dr. Kula, Bishop Kula, talking about how when his brother was working for Public Works, he tried to take the road to his village in Bong, and the indigenous rulers were saying, no, don't bring that road here, because with the road is going to come these Western customs, and our children will not listen to us anymore. So the answer to your question, I hope, was answered in my rant.
It was answered. Okay. It was answered.
And just if I get off, Dynas, please respond to the emails, and we can set up the show so we can have that on that platform. So again, thank you to Ms. Call for being on the show tonight. Thank you for hosting me, Dynas. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you very much, Dynas.
Yeah. All right, Ms. Call, we'll close out. Anything else you'd like to share in closing, and also how can people reach you?
Yeah, so I will post my YouTube. I'm on Facebook, actually. It's YEYIA, and then KAU is my Facebook handle, so you can find me. I think I'm more active on Facebook than YouTube, but you can find me on there. I do Focus on Liberia, Liberia History Channel, every Saturday. I will be on tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Liberia History Channel on Focus on Liberia. They broadcast on YouTube as well.
Okay, perfect. Hey, everyone, thank you so much for joining.
Okay.
Like, share, subscribe. Until next time, family, Dynasty Mirror Search for Huru.
Thank
Peace.
you, everyone. Okay.